Chapter 601, Echo. Barely a second after the echoes of his strike demolished the statue, Dante rolled in the air, hauling himself toward the next statue. It was a crusader, and it was already swinging its massive stone sword toward him. The crusader's blade carved through the air with a deafening roar, its edge glowing faintly with the blood-red sigils etched into its surface. The force alone threatened to shear the very air in two, but Dante was faster. He twisted midair, a streak of white light in the crimson haze, his sword meeting the crusader's blade in a cataclysmic clash. The impact sent shockwaves rippling outward, the reverberation shaking the chamber. "Too slow," Dante muttered, his voice cutting through the chaos. His blade hummed with essence as the light shrouding his body and sword suddenly burst and propelled him in an instant. He appeared behind the crusader, his weapon slicing clean through its torso with surgical precision. The stone figure cracked, crimson energy spilling from the fissure like molten blood. It let out a guttural roar, collapsing into a heap of rubble that disintegrated into ash. Northern, standing at the chamber's edge, chuckled under his breath. Impressive. He is no doubt a strong person. Despite being made of stone, they are not stopping his sword from hitting its mark. Dante was actually strong, very strong, but because of how brightly Northern was shining and how seemingly easy he was making things look, one would almost forget that the lieutenant was a paragon. Northern suppressed a proud grin. "At this rate, you might not need me to deal with all of them." Dante didn't spare him a glance, already moving toward his next target. The remaining crusaders began to shift, their movements fluid and unervingly lifelike. Sigils flared to life across their bodies, pulsating with a crimson, blood-like essence as they synchronized their attack. Two crusaders broke formation, their massive shields raised as barriers, while another launched a torrent of blood spells toward Dante. The crimson spell morphed midair, transforming into jagged spears that rained down with deadly precision. Dante's form blurred, weaving through the onslaught with inhuman grace, but Northern's eyes weren't on him. They were locked on the crusaders, analyzing their patterns, their essence. His chaos eyes flared, the world splitting into layers of raw information. Lines of weakness, fissures in the constructs of their forms, tendrils of soul essence pulsing through their cores. "Interesting," Northern murmured while standing, his arms folded as he patiently waited for his chance to tag in. He observed the crimson-red statue that sat on the tallest throne seat for a moment. Despite the havoc that was being wrought in its chamber, the Blood Guardian seemed unbothered. There was a deep emptiness to its dark eyes, with a tiny dot of red light glowing in the pitch darkness of its gaze. Northern felt something try to burrow into his soul as their gazes met, so intense that he took a step back with a gloomy frown on his face. Dante suddenly tumbled across the chamber, rolling on the ground past him. Northern's eyes rose in excitement as they followed. "Tak!" Groaning, the lieutenant painstakingly raised his hand, then gave a thumbs up. "Tak! You bastard!" Northern immediately, with a raw and vile light burning in his polychoria eyes, swung his head forward with malevolent hunger. Barely perceptible, he vanished, his body looking like it was losing form, blurring. The movement was short-lived, for in an instant Northern was before a crusader. Lieutenant Dante had managed to take out two of the statues in the chamber. It had gotten tougher since they all began to synchronize their attacks, not waiting for one another. While the crusaders were attacking, the casters were casting their spells. And it all gave no time for a proper calculation that should yield a sufficient and efficient reaction. But this was not the case for Northern. All four pupils of his eyes were looking in different directions. Grenger finished manifesting in his hand as he reached the crusader. Grenger materialized in Northern's grip with a crackle of chaotic energy, its twin blades gleaming like blackened void fire. The staff thrummed with raw power, as if it hungered to carve through the crimson haze. The crusader swung its massive sword downward with the force of an avalanche, its blood-red sigils burning brighter as the weapon descended. Northern didn't dodge. He stepped into the attack, twisting Grenger in his hands. The twin blades sang as they met the crusader's strike, splitting the massive sword down its center. The resulting shockwave was a violent roar of energy, but Northern stood firm, his boots skidding only slightly on the blood-slick floor. The Crusader reeled back, off balance, and Northern's grin widened. "You're not bad," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "but not good enough." With a flick of his wrist, Grenger's twin blades rotated, the weapon spinning in his hands like a tempest. Northern surged forward, closing the gap in an instant. The Crusader raised its shield, but it was too slow. Northern struck. The first blade of Grenger bit into the shield's edge, carving deep grooves into the slab of stone. The second blade followed, sweeping in low and slicing clean through the Crusader's knee joint. Then Northern, with a satisfying grin marring his face, muttered, "Echo," coated with a purplish dark essence. Invisible strikes of the same kind bolted out of nowhere, cleaving not just the entirety of the stone monster but even the far end of the wall before which it stood. The statue, cleaved and chopped in bits and pieces from its head to toe, stumbled, its massive frame collapsing to one side. Crimson blood sprayed from all its severed limbs. Only one leg was intact, but Northern didn't give it a chance to recover. He spun Grenger overhead and drove it into the air with the force of a train. "Echo!" to the direction of the incoming Crusaders and blood spells that weaved eerily in the air. The same void-infused strikes appeared, magnanimously multiplying Northern's strike into the air. The impact sent cracks spiderwebbing across the ground and nearby wall. Even the cadaverous chandeliers trembled, their crimson ichor sputtering violently. With a final twist of the staff, Northern swung Grenger to his side, drawing a swift trail of cleave that parted the air. "Echo!" The other Crusaders were already moving. Two charged at once, their synchronized steps shaking the chamber, while a third caster chanted a spell that filled the air with an ominous hum. All of them were sliced from their torso to their lower waist.
Chapter 602, Impossible feat.
The lieutenant managed to raise himself up and lean against the cracked frame of the door, observing the fast battle that was unfolding between Northern and the statues. His eyes widened as they witnessed the scene, and a second later, they even trembled. "What?" he muttered. There was a slight difference to it, but he couldn't deny the stark similarities. The way each strike multiplied as if the air itself was mirroring his attacks, and they carried even more terrifying damage power than his. Echo? It had to be. There was no mistaking it, that was his Echo. But how? Dante's lips trembled. Northern was already moving again, his eyes darting in every direction, his chaos eyes dissecting their every move. In the moment, fractions of visions entered Northern's sight. He could see how all of them positioned and repositioned their movements in brief seconds from now. To his left, a Crusader swung a mace crackling with blood energy, aiming to crush him in a single blow. To his right, another Crusader thrust forward with a spear, its tip glowing with a deadly crimson light. And above, there it was. The spellcaster's glyphs converged into a swirling vortex of blood surge, ready to descend and obliterate everything in its path. Northern smirked. Perfect. The mace-wielding Crusader charged first, its strike descending with thunderous force. Northern sidestepped with casual grace, his motion fluid as though the air itself parted for him. Grenger spun in his hands. Having seen how all the attacks played out, he knew exactly where to strike, and he went for the legs. The staff hummed with power as it cleaved through the stone knees of the Crusader. Echo! Several horizontal slices spread over the Crusader's body and slowly sliced down one after the other. "Let's try something else." Northern spoke to himself as he leaped over the fallen construct, his eyes now locked on the spearman. Mirage! The spear came in fast, but Northern's form suddenly split, quickly emerging in a circle that encased the rest of the statues. Northern looked at all of them. They were like spectral refractions of light and not like cloning. These were purely reflections. What he did, all other reflections also repeated. Even the Grenger was reflected in all of the mirages. The spear pierced through one Northern, but it was merely a reflection of light, so it easily went in and out, the mirage stuttering a bit but quickly stabilizing. Northern's face lit up with glee while Lieutenant Dante's darkened with horror as he saw Northern use another of his talent abilities. This wasn't even a talent ability. The only ability of his talent he had used was Echo, and it was powerful enough to end anything. All it did was reflect his attacks. Oh, I see. So that's how this works. Northern's eyes gleamed. The lieutenant's ability uses reflections? That's quite new. As he readied his sword, so did all the rest of the reflections, readying their reflected Grengers. I wonder if the strikes will also be reflected or if this is merely an illusion. Northern twisted Grenger in his hands, and all of the mirages mirrored his motion with eerie precision. The spearman lunged again, its stone weapon slicing through the air toward another of the reflections. The spear passed through effortlessly, the mirage distorting again like rippling water before snapping back into place. The moment the spear struck, Northern moved. He stepped forward, slashing Grenger upward in a brutal arc. The reflections followed, their strikes synchronized as if tethered to the same thread. The spearman statue didn't stand a chance. The original Grenger tore through its chest, black flame manifesting outward and destabilizing the statue's core. At the same time, every reflected Grenger struck true, carving deep grooves into the air that shimmered with destructive intent. The spearman froze, its body trembling before shattering into fragments of stone and crimson ichor. The echoes of the reflected strikes rippled across the room, their force palpable even in the aftermath. Northern's grin widened, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction. Oh, it's real. Definitely real. The spellcaster above him reacted next, glyphs forming rapidly in the air around it. With a flick of its hand, it unleashed a barrage of blood surge projectiles, each streaking downward like a hailstorm of crimson death. Northern's chaos eyes flared again, tracing the trajectories of each projectile before they even formed. His body moved instinctively, weaving through the onslaught with calculated precision. But it wasn't just him. His mirages danced alongside him, their movements impossibly fluid. The blood surges struck the floor and walls, detonating in bursts of energy that scorched the chamber. But the mirages remained untouched, their ethereal forms slipping through the chaos unscathed. Dante's voice cut through the din, strained and filled with disbelief. This isn't possible. How is he using my abilities and blending them so well too? It took me years of hard work to achieve that result. Northern didn't mind him. He was too focused, his mind racing as he pieced together the nature of the ability he had copied. Northern had copied the Paragon's talent, but not just his talent, all the hard work and progress he had put in to make it come this far. Hence, making it his own starting point with an ability such as this, it was practically impossible for any mortal to catch up to him. Dante's eyes continued to tremble and his mind raced with terror. If he is using even my abilities that I haven't used, does that mean he copied not my abilities but my talent in whole? He can copy talents? Come to think of it, he used clones the other time, and the Kageyama Scion also did. The lieutenant felt the lines arranging together, but the only thing left to believe such a phenomenon was for his mind to accept that such a thing was possible. But that was harder than it sounded. Every human had a soul, and when their soul reached maturity, a core began to form. This was the first stage of awakening. After defeating the rift, the core stabilized and talent became more apparent. Soul essence became usable too. Hence, even if he had a talent-copying ability, it was impossible to permanently copy one's talent because it was like taking the traits of their core and imprinting it into yours. It could cause a major disaster. But soul cores were fashioned for such a thing to never be possible. Hence, the only explanation for all of this was that Northern could temporarily use others' talents when he copied them. But this deduction only left the lieutenant in dismembered fear. Something was not making any sense, and he couldn't put his finger on what it was, but it had to do with Northern's ominous essence. What about the ominous essence was wrong? He couldn't tell. Chapter 603, Supremacy. Northern leapt upward, his original form targeting the spellcaster while the reflections mirrored his ascent. Grenger burned with black flames as he brought it down in a devastating overhead slash. The spellcaster raised a barrier of blood essence, but it wasn't enough. The original Grenger collided with the barrier, shattering it like glass. Simultaneously, every reflected Grenger struck from a different angle, their blows converging on the spellcaster's body. The combined force of the strikes was catastrophic. The spellcaster crumbled, its entire form shattering in a brilliant flash of crimson light. The echoes of the reflected attacks resounded through the chamber, leaving cracks running across the walls and floor. Northern landed gracefully, his reflections dissipating into faint wisps of light that dissolved into the air. Dante stared at him, his expression a mixture of awe and horror. Northern had, in a quick moment, dealt with all the Crusader statues and spellcasters in the chamber. All that remained was the Blood Guardian itself and its two chiefs that flanked its left and right. Northern watched with blazing eyes, an eerie crimson reflection on his face, as they slowly stood from their seats. Simultaneously, the scepter of the Blood Guardian in the center seemed to intensify its glow. The creature, however, stayed seated as the other two rose to their feet. Rising to their full height, they towered over Northern, their blood-forged weapons gleaming with deadly intent. The chief to the Guardian's left wielded a long glaive, its crimson blade pulsating with a rhythm that mirrored the glow of the scepter. The chief on the right carried a massive round shield etched with intricate runes, paired with a jagged, blood-red blade that oozed raw energy. Northern's gaze flicked between them. His chaos eyes carefully diagnosed them in and out, stripping their souls naked in an instant before its mighty visual prowess. And just like that was how Northern discovered an interesting development. A network of energy streams tethered the chiefs to the Guardian's scepter. The chiefs weren't just warriors. They were conduits, extensions of the Guardian's power. "Shall I try something new?" Northern muttered beneath his breath, a grin slowly creeping up his face. The glaive-wielding chief moved first, its weapon slicing through the air with a high-pitched hum. Northern's grin deepened. Ice manipulation. The temperature in the chamber plummeted instantly. A bone-chilling frost spread from Northern's feet, creeping across the blood-soaked floor like living tendrils. The heat radiating from the glaive faltered, its fiery arc snuffed out mid-swing. With a sharp flick of his wrist, Northern conjured a jagged spear of void ice in his offhand. The spear wasn't merely cold. It radiated an absence so profound that even the blood-tinged light in the room seemed to recoil from it. The glaive-wielder's strike descended, but Northern was gone, his body a blur as he sidestepped the attack with eerie precision. The void ice spear lashed out in retaliation, grazing the chief's glaive. The reaction was instantaneous. The glaive's crimson glow dimmed, frost racing along its edge as the void ice devoured its energy. The glaive wielder staggered, confusion rippling through its monstrous frame. "Not used to taking something from you, huh?" Northern taunted, his voice sharp as the frost spread through the chamber. The shield-bearer charged now, its massive form barreling toward Northern with the force of an avalanche. Its shield emitted a crimson barrier, runes glowing brighter as it closed the distance. Northern didn't move. Instead, he planted the void ice spear into the ground. The chamber rumbled as the frost spread upward, transforming into a massive wall of shimmering black ice. The shield-bearer collided with the barrier. For a moment, it seemed unstoppable, until the runes on its shield began to flicker. Cracks spiderwebbed across the barrier, the frost seeping into the very essence of the blood-forged shield. "Void consumes all," Northern muttered, his voice a chilling whisper. The shield shattered. Shards of frozen blood essence scattered across the chamber like broken glass, and the shield-bearer reeled backward, clutching its weaponless arm. Northern moved like a predator. In an instant, he was behind the glaive-wielder. He had displaced Grenger moments ago and now swirled his hand midair. From nothing, an ice spear spiraled into existence, and when its creation was complete, like a javelin, Northern thrust the spear into the air. The glaive-wielder raised its weapon to block, but the void ice spear surged forward like a living entity, devouring the glaive entirely. The weapon crumbled into frozen dust. "Your turn," Northern hissed, The glaive wielder roared, raising a clawed hand glowing with crimson light, but Northern was faster. Another void ice spear materialized in his hand, and he drove it through the chief's chest. The room seemed to hold its breath. The glaive wielder froze, literally. Its body was encased in void ice in seconds, the frost crawling up its limbs, over its face, and into its hollow eyes. A moment later, it shattered into 1,000 pieces, the shards disintegrating into nothingness before they could even hit the ground. The shield-bearer roared in fury, its blade swinging in a desperate arc. Northern caught it mid-swing with a single finger coated with ice, stopping its blade. From the tip of Northern's finger, the entire weapon froze, frost cascading down its jagged edge like a predator claiming its prey. The shield-bearer's eyes widened in disbelief as the crimson blade turned brittle, its once intimidating glow now a muted, fading ember. Northern tilted his head, his grin sharp enough to cut steel. "You monsters need to put more muscle into your blows." With a flick of his wrist, the frozen blade splintered into shards, each piece caught in an invisible vortex of void ice swirling around Northern. The shards hung suspended for a fleeting moment, glimmering like deadly stars, before Northern thrust his hand forward. The fragments obeyed. They shot toward the shield-bearer with terrifying precision, piercing through its darkened steel armor with no resistance at all. Each shard carried a fragment of void ice's consuming power, freezing the creature from the inside out. The shield-bearer stumbled backward, its massive frame cracking audibly as the frost raced through its body. It roared one final time, a defiant bellow that echoed through the chamber. Then its roar cut off. Chapter 604, Absolute. Lieutenant Dante watched with trembling eyes as the creature's body shattered into a burst of frozen blood essence, the shards dissolving into nothingness. What is this? If there was one thing that couldn't be denied, it was that Northern's ability had a striking resemblance to Ryan's. Of course, both the breadth of application and appearance were strange and offsetting in a way he couldn't quite figure out. In fact, he felt that if he continued to probe that part of his suspicion, a strange and evil darkness would consume him. There was also this peculiar forgetfulness that lingered in his mind. He couldn't tell exactly what was happening to him, but he was sure Northern was either an influence or perhaps the mastermind behind it. "He is dangerous, very dangerous. I was wrong the whole time. This is not someone to be trifled with. Killing him would be reckless. The best I can do is ensure we never cross blades." The lieutenant's eyes stayed fixed on Northern. Northern exhaled, frost swirling around him like an aura of death. He glanced at the lieutenant, catching the man's lingering gaze. Then he gave a thumbs down. "Not tagging in yet. Looks like you'll have to take a back seat on this one, Lieutenant." He turned away, bringing his attention to the Blood Guardian, the only remaining foe in the chamber. The Guardian still sat upon its throne, unmoving, but the scepter it held began to pulse with a violent, almost desperate energy. Crimson light spilled from the orb atop it, casting grotesque shadows across the walls. "Still hiding behind your power?" Northern taunted, his voice echoing with a mix of amusement and challenge. "Let's see how far that gets you." The Guardian didn't respond. Instead, the crimson light condensed into a blinding beam that shot toward Northern with the force of a collapsing star. Northern didn't flinch. The crimson beam pierced the air right in front of his eyes but never reached him. He remained unscathed as the beam vanished completely. The chamber fell silent as all traces of the beam disappeared. Northern raised his hands and washed them over his face. When his hands came away, Chaos eyes blazed with intensity as he took a step forward. The Guardian shifted for the first time, rising slowly from its throne. Its massive frame loomed over Northern, the scepter clutched tightly in its clawed hand. The energy it had poured into the attack returned to the scepter tenfold, the orb now pulsating like a second heart. The Guardian slammed the scepter into the ground, and the entire chamber quaked. Crimson veins spread from the scepter, weaving across the floor and walls, feeding the room with raw power. Northern stopped, his grin widening. "Ah, so you do have some fight left in you." The frost around him surged as he raised one hand. A single, massive spear of void ice formed above him, its jagged edges emitting dark mists that seemed to fall, obscuring even the crimson ground. This spear was different. Larger, darker, more alive. It pulsed with the power of the void, an entity in its own right, as if the frost had taken Northern's will and amplified it into a weapon of absolute destruction. Northern stared at it with azure stars glittering in his eyes. This is what DIY caused? It really is magnificent. And this ice manipulation, maybe because it has been amplified by the power of void and chaos, feels stronger and unlimited in any form. Its only limitation is my mind, and fortunately, I happen to be a creative engineer. Northern's face radiated with dangerous glee. The Guardian raised its scepter, the crimson orb glowing brighter than ever, readying another attack. Northern's voice cut through the tension, calm and absolute. Void consumes all. With a flick of his fingers, the spear launched forward, its sheer force tearing through the air with a deafening roar. The moment it struck the Guardian's scepter, Northern added, "Echo." Several additional, earth-shattering impacts pummeled the orb, resounding throughout the entire hall. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of destruction as the spear's multiplied force surged through the scepter, the crimson orb atop it shattering like fragile glass. The impact reverberated outward, each echo amplifying the destruction tenfold. The Guardian staggered, its colossal frame trembling as waves of essence rippled through its body. Crimson veins crawling along the walls and floor shattered like brittle vines, bleeding light before fading into oblivion. The Guardian let out an unearthly roar, its voice a blend of agony and fury. "Yeah, judging by your reaction, I guess I did hit a nerve. That orb has been giving me an unsettling feeling, so I had to do away with it first before dealing with you." Northern smiled. "Now, shall we end this?" The darkness in the creature's eyes deepened and roiled with primal fury. Northern advanced slowly, each step precise and unrelenting, his presence dominating the space. The frost clung to his form like a living extension of his will. He raised his hand, fingers curling into a fist as the remnants of the shattered void spear reassembled, forming an array of jagged weapons suspended in midair. "I see you now," Northern said, his voice low, his chaos eyes blazing with an almost celestial intensity. He could see it clearly, the tether that connected the Guardian to the heart of the rift. The scepter had not been its weapon. It had been its anchor, a lifeline to the overwhelming power that sustained its existence. Now severed, the Guardian was vulnerable, and his eyes could now see where the core of the rift was. The creature, as it beheld Northern's eyes, widened its own, losing its composure in flippant rage. It lunged forward, its massive hands swinging in a desperate attempt to crush Northern. But Northern was no longer standing where he had been. A flicker of motion, and he was at the Guardian's side, the void weapons striking like a swarm of predators. Each blade pierced the Guardian's silk, shattering its once impenetrable carapace of blood. Crimson ichor sprayed into the air, only to freeze and evaporate in the void's cold embrace. The Guardian twisted, swinging its massive arm in a wide arc. Northern ducked low with ease, the attack missing him by a hair. "Look at how unsightly and desperate a supposedly apex Belial like you has become." Granger appeared in his hand. He retaliated with a swift upward slash of the staff, the black blade cutting through the Guardian's arm like paper. The severed limb crashed to the floor, disintegrating into shards of blood essence. As the severed limb fell to the ground, blood curled out of the creature's amputated arm and formed a new one. Northern tilted his head with glee in his eyes. "This makes it all the more enjoyable." Chapter 605. An Execution. Northern's grin stretched wider, a glint of dark amusement sparking in his chaos eyes. The Guardian's renewed arm flexed, its grotesque sinews pulsating with crimson energy as if mocking his assault. Yet Northern remained unfazed, the frost swirling around him intensifying as the temperature in the chamber plummeted further. Lieutenant Dante, despite standing far away, could see dark frost subtly spreading around his exposed hand. The cold wasn't biting or in any way beyond normal, but it spread dangerously. His power is dangerous, the lieutenant thought with a tight frown on his face. I wonder how long you can keep regenerating parts of your body. Looks like in a while, I'll be having a much more enjoyable battle. Northern's voice resounded with the hint of an insane glee. The Guardian lunged again, faster this time, its hands extending into claws, slicing through the air like a storm of razors. Each strike carried a force that fractured the stone floor, sending shards flying. But Northern danced through the onslaught, his movements fluid, almost taunting. The void ice weapons hovering around him moved in tandem, intercepting blows and retaliating with precision. You're predictable, Northern said, sidestepping another swipe. He thrust Grenger forward, the black blade piercing through the Guardian's torso. Instead of recoiling, the creature roared and surged forward, impaling itself further onto the staff. His other hand swung down, aiming to crush Northern outright. Northern's chaos eyes flared. Black Lance. For a moment, a grave silence descended upon the chamber. It looked like there was no impact. Then suddenly, the entirety of the hand was nowhere to be found. Even the Blood Guardian itself was surprised. The Guardian stumbled back, its massive frame trembling. It stared blankly at its missing hand, which was slowly flowing with streams of crimson ichor. Then it turned its deep but trembling eyes to Northern, who returned the gesture with a crooked smile. What? It's not even that impressive. You should see the kind of devastating effect the improvised version of it has. Northern dismissed Grenger and slowly raised his hands. Black tendrils stretched out of his somber armor and folded over it, coating it and making it sable. That part of Northern's hands looked like he was wearing a gauntlet crafted with the essence of the night. It gleamed viciously with a gloomy aura. You feel that? Northern asked, his voice calm, his gaze unwavering. That's your existence about to be dismantled, piece by piece. The Blood Guardian roared, its cry reverberating through the chamber with primal fury. Both of its arms ignited with crimson essence, growing larger and more jagged as they morphed into grotesque weapons. It swung wildly, desperation seeping into its every move. Northern didn't flinch. He stood his ground, the black gauntlet pulsing with raw power, the void tendrils shifting like living shadows around his arm. Your struggle, Northern began, his tone eerily casual as he tilted his head to the side, effortlessly avoiding another crushing strike, is beautiful. Pointless, but beautiful. The Guardian's enraged movements became frenzied, each attack carving deep gouges into the chamber walls. The air itself seemed to ripple with the force of its strikes, but none of them connected. Northern weaved through the chaos with unerring precision, his movements almost lazy yet impossibly sharp. The frost clinging to him surged, spreading across the ground like a creeping blight. The Guardian's footing faltered as the ice claimed its legs, rooting them in place. Northern's grin widened. I told you, void consumes all. He raised his gauntlet hand and snapped his fingers. The sound was sharp, echoing unnaturally loud. In an instant, the frost erupted into jagged spires, spearing through the Guardian's legs and torso. The creature roared in pain as the void-laced ice drained the crimson essence from its body. The vibrant energy siphoned into the blackened constructs. You feel that, don't you? Northern taunted, his voice low and menacing. That's not just ice. That's the void unraveling your essence. The Guardian thrashed, tearing at the spires with its now grotesque claws, but for every one it shattered, two more grew in its place. Lieutenant Dante watched from a distance, his face pale. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the scene. This isn't a battle. This is an execution. Northern took a step closer, his chaos eyes blazing with unworldly light. The chaos constructs around him seemed to respond, shifting and pulsating through the air. Let's end this, shall we? Northern extended his gauntlet hand, and the tendrils of void energy coiled outward, latching onto the Guardian's chest. The creature roared again, louder this time, its voice laced with fear as the tendrils burrowed deep into its form. Northern's smile turned cold. Don't worry, you'll be reborn in my soul. The tendrils surged upward, converging into a singular, massive lance of void. It hung in the air above the Guardian, radiating a gravity-defying aura of annihilation. For a moment, everything went silent, even time seemingly stopped. The only sound that could be heard was the faint hum of the lance's power. Then Northern brought his hand down. The lance descended with cataclysmic force, piercing through the Guardian's chest and into the ground below. The impact unleashed a wave of void energy that obliterated everything in its path, carving a deep crater into the chamber floor. When the dust settled, the Guardian was gone, its massive form reduced to wisps of fading crimson essence. Northern stood at the center of the destruction, his frost dissipating into the air. Congratulations, you have slain an Apex Belial for the first time. You have gained 32 talent fragments. You have gained 1,000 talent fragments for an outstanding achievement. He exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the icy chill. Lieutenant Dante's voice broke the heavy silence. What are you? Northern turned to him, his chaos eyes dimming slightly. He tilted his head, a crooked grin finding its way to his lips once again. I'm just someone trying to survive, he said, his tone almost lighthearted. Then his grin faded, replaced by something darker, more foreboding. But sometimes, survival requires being something more. He sighed and focused his gaze on the throne seat where the Blood Guardian had been sitting. Northern leaped over the deep crater that separated him from the throne seat and landed in front of it. Then he slowly raised the Void Tendril's gauntlet and destroyed the seat. Congratulations, you have discovered one of the cores of the rift. Surprising really, it really does have more than one core. It was just as he had noticed while fighting the Blood Guardian. The rift had more than one core. Isn't that supposed to be impossible? Northern moved to the next seat on the right and also destroyed it. Congratulations, you have discovered another core of the rift. He wordlessly went on to the one to his left and destroyed it too. Congratulations, you have discovered the last core of the rift. Immediately, the entirety of the chamber began to shake violently. The chamber's walls quivered as cracks spread like spiderwebs, shards of stone falling in a chaotic rain. The crimson sky above flickered, as though the rift itself was gasping for breath. Lieutenant Dante steadied himself, gripping the hilt of his blade while his eyes darted to Northern, who stood at the epicenter of the chaos, unfazed. Youngling, what did you do? Dante shouted, his voice barely audible over the rumble. Northern looked back, his expression indifferent. Closed a chapter. The void tendrils receded from his gauntlet, retreating into the shadows of his armor. He glanced at the flickering sky, sensing the shift in the rift's energy. It's collapsing. You might want to start running. What the hell is it with this kind of violent closure? Dante cursed under his breath, as his instincts told him to heed the warning. He turned toward the exit but paused, glancing back at Northern, who hadn't moved. You're not coming? Dante asked, his voice strained with urgency. Northern smirked, his chaos eyes glinting. I have something to collect. Before Dante could argue, the ground beneath them split, creating a deep fissure that swallowed the remaining throne seats. A wave of scarlet energy surged upward, the rift's essence converging into a single, pulsating sphere at the chamber's center. Northern extended his hand, his gauntlet reforming. Void tendrils lashed out, anchoring themselves to the sphere. Go, Northern commanded, his voice laced with authority. I'll meet you outside. Dante hesitated for a moment longer before turning and sprinting toward the exit, navigating the crumbling chamber as debris fell around him. Northern remained still, his gaze fixed on the pulsating sphere of energy. 3 cores, he muttered to himself, his tone contemplative. You were hiding something, weren't you? The sphere responded, shuddering violently as if resisting his pull. The tendrils tightened, siphoning its essence. Warning. Unstable rift detected. You have discovered a chaos core. Core extraction in progress. Northern's grin widened with madness lighting in his eyes. Chapter 606. Traces of the Chaos Prince. Chaos Core. Of course, it was something Northern had never heard about or thought existed. He didn't think he would ever come across a rift whose core was crafted using explicit properties of chaos instead of soul. Northern stood there with gleaming blue eyes as he pondered a few things before proceeding with what he was supposed to do. But if it's a chaos rift, why were they enemies that function only on the principles of soul essence? Or in this case, should it be soul force? Northern paused. His arms folded while thoughts seemed to pound his own head. No, things that I have no idea of are popping up. All the more reason to go to the academy and find out whatever I can about all of these. The academy was an Athenaeum with all kinds of books, and most especially, detailed records of the history of both the world and the rifts that several nations and clans may have missed or do not have. Northern felt his resolve to go to the academy solidify again and sighed. He looked at the sphere, carefulness etched in his darkly radiating eyes. The void tendrils slowly but progressively continued to absorb the sphere. At first, there wasn't any strange or out-of-place feeling. However, Northern suddenly began to feel a shift in his state. He felt like his entire soul was being squeezed and wriggled like a wet cloth. The feeling made him instantly crumble to his knees, supporting himself from total collapse with his hands. The void tendrils, however, continued to do what they were doing. Northern felt the pain intensify. Whenever something was affecting his soul, he experienced a lot of pain. Why did it have to be so? An experience such as this one had him wondering. Time passed, and the pain began to become more bearable, or perhaps less painful. Northern did not know which and couldn't tell because he had been in such a painful state that he almost lost consciousness. He slowly pushed himself back to his feet as the pain faded away. At the same time, the system came. Congratulations! You have found a trace of chaos. Chaos has been absorbed. The power of chaos in you is rising. Northern felt a faint screeching sensation in his head, causing him to close his eyes. As he opened them, the system displayed a new panel before his eyes, with strange runes. The thing was, the runes were familiar to Northern. They were exactly the same as those he had seen in the tower, and he had no difficulty reading them. The lost civilization was heralded by the Chaos Prince. Even though he never sought the responsibility of a leader, his destiny clutched tight to him like a terminal disease. His decisions influenced the beginning of the plagues. Congratulations, you have found a trace of the Chaos Prince in the Blood Rift, one of the 10 plagues. Start a conquest for the rest of the plagues and discover more trace of the Chaos Prince. Northern stared at the panel wordlessly. Even in the crumbling reality of the rift, he was detached and unbothered about what was going on around him. I received a quest from the system? That's a bit weird. Is it helping me? I thought the system has been something that operates on certain laws and principles to meet expected ends based on what my capabilities are. Northern folded his hand. His brows furrowed in confusion. He had always thought of the system as an automation system that had one job, to inform. Of course, that automation system also had its unique ability that allowed Northern to copy talents. But aside from that unique ability, Northern had never noticed the system act sentient. He never thought it would. Sentient in this case meant doing more than what it usually would do. Giving Northern a conquest to find the other plagues and discover more traces of the Chaos Prince was something it would never do. Could this have been caused by that DIY? Northern raised a brow as he thought. He stayed still, thinking deeply for the next few seconds before eventually moving. Northern felt the ground beneath him begin to crack and tremble, as if everything was being unearthed. Immediately, he jumped away from the place, landing afar and atop several debris of the collapsed ceiling. Northern! Widening his eyes a bit, Northern shifted his head to the direction where the chorus shout had sounded from. His eyes widened even more as he saw them. Shin, Ryan, and Dante were pushing through the fierce and violent storm that was unearthing everything. They forced themselves through the turbulent veil of destruction and shouted his name several times until it finally reached him. Northern's widened eyes creased back with a puzzled frown rising on his brows. Are they dumb? Why would they come back? His visage reflected sincerely that he had no idea. Because any sane person who had seen what he had been doing from the start of the rift would know that he was more than enough to take care of himself. They should have just prioritized their safety and gone back. What the hell are they doing here? Thinking about it was going to achieve while he made his first long jump, disappearing into the storm, a quick thought crossed his mind. Why is Limitless Void not absorbing the rift? I have not gotten a message that the rift is being absorbed. Is something wrong? Northern furrowed his brows slightly as he landed next to his father, Ryan, and the lieutenant. He shot a stern gaze at them. What do you guys think you're doing? He turned his eyes especially to Lieutenant Dante. Your father insisted that he was not going to go back unless it's with you. Coming with him seemed like the least proper thing to do. And this guy Ryan, I had him tag along. I need to talk to him after this rift is over, so I didn't let him leave first. Besides, he didn't seem opposed at all. Northern glared at him, but the lieutenant's gaze was straight and indifferent, regardless of Northern's look at that moment. Anyways, the rift is closing, so let's go. Northern along with the rest of them ran through the storm, nimbly leaping from here to there to skillfully maneuver and avoid the trajectory of dangerous debris. At last, they passed the violent gale and reached where the rift portal had torn open. Ryan and the Paragon passed through, Shin also passed through, and then Northern. Before going through, Northern glanced back at the rift as a pitch-black space corroded it. Something was definitely strange about this rift. The limitless void till the end did not absorb the rift. That alone was unusual. But another unusual thing was the fact that this was a rift, a place that the Chaos Prince had an influence in manifested as a rift. Not to forget, the source of this rift was incredibly strange too. Could this really be a coincidence? But how many times does a random dude throw a sudden rift escalation, and that rift suddenly appears to be tied to the Chaos Prince that I am related to by powers? Really, how many times does that happen? Northern wanted to be unbelieving that this could have been a coincidence, but he also felt like it could have indeed been a coincidence. Alas, he decided not to decide for now and instead focus on what was next in front of him. Then he walked out of the rift. The familiar scape of the underground spread out before his vision, only that now, there was a lot of noise, and a lot of people. Northern paused for a couple of seconds before fully realizing that the underground might still be the same, but it wasn't at the same time. Temporary camp tents with the military sigil were raised here and there, and people were being treated by military medics who wore a brown military uniform with the sigil of a large cross and snake curling its base on the back. Several of them ran from here to there, helter-skelter, answering calls and moving with compact, portable boxes. He stared around blankly. One of the medics immediately approached him. "Hello, sir. Do you need any medical attention?" The medic tried to touch Northern's shoulder to start his examination, but the white-haired boy instinctively shifted his shoulder away slightly, giving the medic a dark and soul-crushing glare. "I'm sorry, I just wanted to check." The medic stuttered. Before he could say any more, Lieutenant Dante touched him. "Excuse yourself." At the intimidating tone of the lieutenant, the medic dashed away as fast as he could, sweat pouring all over his face. Dante looked at Northern with a little smile. "I guess this is your first time coming out of a rift that is not in the Dark Continent. You look lost." "Ah, that's right." It was until then that Northern remembered again that he wasn't in the Dark Continent and rifts were in the Central Plains. All these attentions and care, and crowd of soldiers and servers in order to help the drifters rest and recover their strength was very strange to him. Chapter 607. Unbelief. Northern looked lost for a minute before he allowed himself to be shown towards a seat. Several medics were gathered around a certain red-haired girl that lay unconscious. Northern glanced in that direction for a while and muttered, "The lieutenant's undering." He remembered Shane looking quite pale and unwell, then a few moments before he slept and woke up to the final confrontation. Everyone else seemed to be very fine, including Shin, Alistran, and Ryan. A man in a black attire, so modern it looked like a suit but had an aura of medieval attached to it, watched the man talking to Shin and tried to make out what he was saying. But before he could fully do so, a man wearing the same kind of attire arrived in front of him. This one, however, looked bored and detached from the world, in comparison to the one talking to Shin. He looked like he had not slept in 10 years, drowsy even in his movement and speech. Yeah, hello. I am Jax Netter. I am a civil servant, and I have come to ask about your experiences in that rift. With a lot of hiccups, he brought out an inked pen and a plain compiled book of sheets, folded out one leaf after another, and looked at Northern. His eyes stayed on Northern for a moment, then he drifted off, nodding his head. Ah, right. So, we will start with your name. Northern, still somehow dumbfounded and in slight denial of this reality, lingered. The man's eyes met his again, and that was when he decided to speak. I am Northern. The civil servant raised a brow. What a unique name. His voice dragged the words. Just Northern? He asked, looking at Northern, who again lingered before responding. Yes, just Northern. Okay, so how old are you? If you can also provide your accurate date of birth, that will be nice. On the 27th day of the Elfak, in 1651, the civil servant's eyes stayed on Northern with a bit of uncertainty. 16 years old? That can't be. He narrowed his eyes and asked again. Are you sure, sir? With that date of birth, you are 16 years old. Factoring your height and the level of maturity displayed on your face, you don't look 16. Northern curled a corner of his lips, trying hard to suppress the full glory of his grin from escalating. Is that so? I look quite mature, don't I? What's with this self-adoration? The civil servant raised a brow, silently observing Northern's narcissistic demeanor. Well, I am very young. I am 16. The civil servant spared Northern a few more seconds of intense looks before deciding to write that down anyway with a shrug. After a brief pause, his draggy voice came again. What is your drifter soul rank? I'm a transient rank. The civil servant's eyes slowly widened. He froze their blinking, then his eyes creased into a frown. You must think I have the time to be joking around. Northern shrugged slightly with his head. I couldn't care less if you do or not. I want to get away from this as fast as I can, rest, and have a family reunion. The man's eyes stayed stubbornly on Northern, furrowing closer with each passing millisecond. Sparks ignited fiercely as the two gazes locked, until a third party suddenly arrived. Excuse me, sir. Northern turned his head to see the owner of the voice. Immediately, his eyes kind of lightened. This man is a member of the Therian Citadel, and as per the exclusive Citadel right to keep their drifters away from the government, I'd appreciate it if you stop questioning him any further. The drowsy civil servant stared into the Citadel headmaster, Thalen's eyes for a few seconds. Then he said, Then provide me an ID. Thalen brought out a sleek rectangular card that contained Northern's biodata. Is that a rank card? Thalen frowned a bit. Yes. Why? The civil servant turned his face to Northern. This young man claims to be a sage. I would love to see how true that is, or else I have the right to take him into custody for obstructing the work of a government official. Thalen also looked at Northern, signaling with a raise of his brows to inquire what exactly was going on. Because he also knew that the last time Northern left, which was just 6 days ago, he was still a master. But Northern responded with a nonchalant shrug. Thalen sighed and explained, I'm sorry for letting this happen. I'm sure we can work something out to avoid the card. The civil servant's voice was resolute and stern. At that point, it was obvious to Thalen that this guy was not going to accept his bribery offer. He sighed and placed the card in the guy's hand. They can only hold him for 24 hours anyway. After that, I'll be sure to pay back this embarrassment. He glared at the guy. The civil servant, oblivious of the anger in Thalen's gaze, gave Northern the card. Northern collected it with a raised brow. What do I do with this? All you have to do is pour your essence into it, and it will automatically display your rank at the base. The civil servant scoffed as he watched Thalen have to explain the process to Northern. Almost everyone knows these things, He claims to be a sage and doesn't even know how to use a rank card. Don't play with me, fool. Northern did as he was told and poured a little of his essence into the card. Immediately, the white card began to turn black and the black letters on the card became purple. At the base of the card was written, Soul Rank, Transient. And at its top, just beside his name, a new word appeared, Sage Northern. Thalen's eyes widened while the civil servant's mouth dropped. He really is a sage? The drowsy man was shocked to his core.
Chapter 608 Impossible phénoménon.
Thalen quickly grabbed the card out of Northern's hand, bringing it closer to his eyes to be sure he was seeing correctly. What is this I am seeing? It was still there. Sage Northern. His eyeballs rolled down to the base of the card. Drifter's rank, transient. It was all there, it wasn't faked. Not to mention, the card had changed color. I have never heard of a soul rank card changing color at all. Could there have been a malfunction? But I have also never heard of a malfunction in the rank card. The rank card was crafted by the best of the best craftsmen. Not just mundane, but drifters that awakened with craftsmanship abilities. Since it had been in circulation 50 years ago, never had it been recorded that it changed color or broke. So this couldn't be possible. There was a first time for everything, but Thalen knew enough about Northern's capabilities that he didn't want to doubt this. The color change of the card called for extra attention, but that did not deny the fact that the boy's rank had changed from vagrant to transient. There's no way he became a sage in 6 days. Indeed, there was no way. Thalen's thought was literal and introspective. Perhaps if he were to consider the influence of the rift, it took a lot of time to absorb a soul core. And one didn't have all the time in the world, not with the dangers of a Tier 7 rift lurking around them. This did not make any sense. Thalen held his forehead, closing his eyes for a moment. He turned to the civil servant whose mouth was still open and eyes still blinking. You've had your truth now. Can you leave us? The voice was polite, but something in the depth of Thalen's eyes hinted at a coming rudeness. The civil servant glanced at Northern once more, his eyes still drowning in disbelief. A sage who is 16 years old? He had never heard of such a thing before. Never in his entire life. He slowly removed himself from the two of them and walked away, still sending glances back at Northern. Northern watched him leave with a slight frown on his face, and when the guy kept looking back, his frown deepened. What's the deal with him? Thalen also glanced back and shook his head, sighing before he started. The civil servants are non-military arms of the government that oversee the activities of the Rift and Drifters. They'll jump at any chance to recruit a drifter. I see, Northern muttered. There was silence for a while, then Thalen's voice came again. Besides, anyone would be like that after what they just saw. His eyes scanned Northern's eyes. Northern looked down at the card in the headmaster's hand and opened his mouth. Oh. Northern was dumbfounded for a minute, not exactly sure what the news was or what to do. He shrugged. What do you mean, oh? You just became a sage in 6 days and you don't have anything you want to say. The headmaster's voice soared but quickly came back down. Northern lingered in silence for a while. He looked here and there, then brought his eyes back to Thalen and shrugged again. It just kinda happened, really. Even I was not expecting it. I guess we can just say I have a fast growth rate. Thalen slapped his palm on his face. A fast growth rate? He mumbled to himself. No one, especially not a drifter, has a fast growth rate. You think if such a thing was possible, paragons would be scarce. I'm special, Northern retorted with an amazing smile. A smile that only poured fuel to the flames burning in Thalen's heart. The attitude and energy Northern was giving to this situation was like he was underrating it. Perhaps he did not know the gravity of what is happening right now, Thalen thought. He breathed in and out several times before facing Northern again. Listen, he said, holding Northern's shoulders. Look at me. I'm looking at you. You seem out of gas. Are you okay? Leave me, let's focus on you. I'm going to try to dissect this for you so you understand. He stared deeply into Northern's eyes with focus. I heard the governor of Arcadia died. The owner of the mansion you guys lived in? Did you meet him before he died? That man? Yes, I did. What about it? That man is a sage. Oh, I see. Okay, indeed you see. But what you don't see is, that man awakened at the age of 15 just like you, and became a sage at the age of 47. Northern narrowed his eyes, slightly surprised. That was heavily slow. Exactly what I'm saying. That's how these things are. Thalen's words were suddenly filled with vigor. But when you look at it, he wasn't in the Dark Continent and maybe he didn't enter so many rifts. The headmaster shook his head. No, you are not getting something right. If we count the number of rifts he has been into and the number of monsters he has slain, I'm sure you are not even halfway there. Northern's face immediately contorted darkly. Don't say what you don't know. He might have been in more rifts but certainly not killed more monsters. Thalen paused for a couple of seconds. Then he sighed and nodded his head. Okay, perhaps you are right. Perhaps you have killed more monsters. But a normal transition from a vagrant all the way to a transient soul rank should take not just 1 or 2 but at least 5 years, if one was absorbing soul cores every day. Make it make sense that you achieved that in 6 days. Northern shrugged. It doesn't have to make sense to you. It is what I am. I don't make sense to anyone. The headmaster stood there, shocked and helplessly going to accept that Northern had progressed 2 ranks in 6 days without any proper explanation. He felt like his head would burst from all the racing thoughts, bringing and dismissing the possibilities of what this impossible phenomenon could be. Chapter 609 Reunion Part 1. Along with the rest of the Citadel members, Thalen was able to take care of things, curb and control them from escalating. Since Ryan, Northern, and Shin were already under the temporary canopy of the Citadel, there was not much that the civil servants could do. At last, after all the questions, they let the questioning go. The lieutenant and his subordinates, however, were nowhere to be found even before the government let them go. Northern was a bit disappointed. He thought he and Lieutenant Dante had at least become somewhat acquainted. But the dude left with no goodbyes. It's probably all for the best. He has things he is doing, after all. Northern sighed and folded his hands. The 3 of them were standing while they waited for Thalen to wrap things up. After a while, the headmaster of the Therian Citadel arrived at their front. Northern, already pissed, frowned as Thalen got to their front. What is it with all the questions? Is this how it usually goes? Thalen shook his head. No, this usually does not happen. But aside from the death of the governor, an entire cathedral was destroyed. The government would want the person that caused the destruction of the cathedral to be found. He looked at Shin and the rest of them. And you guys were certain that this elf did all these? Shin smiled and nodded his head. Northern had no idea why, but it seemed the entire team had lied on his behalf. What a waste of lies! Whether or not they found out what he had done was not going to stop him from doing the things he wants to do or going where he wants to go. It would have definitely become a bother, but Northern was sure he would still be able to walk through it. Anyway, the government seems to now have a lot on their plates with the death of the governor. This could be the beginning of a major coup in the government. Thalen was speaking, but his eyes were out of focus, his hands below his chin. This could be an opportunity to tap into how this will affect the market before anything does. If it's a coup being led by Lieutenant Dante, it would cause a serious uproar for a while. Alistran shook his head slightly and stopped him, making Thalen look at him with the first sentence. You are wrong. That guy, he was an ascendant the last time we saw him and we knew how strong he was, did we not? He is a paragon now and is 10 times stronger than whatever he was before. Thalen narrowed his eyes. What are you trying to say? Dante, he has grown very strong. Let's not think lightly of this matter. Northern exchanged a brief glance between Alistran and the Citadel headmaster. Then he looked down. I guess I kind of understand now. That airship, the earthquake, the death of the governor also was all caused by him. That explains why he left early. Northern exhaled and removed his face from the ground. Well, I wish him great endeavors in all his dreams. He fixed his eyes on Thalen, who was looking at Alistran with a strange expression on his face. Whatever encounter they had with Dante before, both of them knew. His eyes were asking silently if Alistran was really saying this despite all that. At least, until Northern's voice cut the sharp silence like a knife through butter. So, where from here? Thalen sighed. The government business is the government business. We should go to the Citadel, and I shall continue finding your mother from there. There's no need for that. I found my mother. Thalen's brows lowered intensely. What? Even Shin's eyes blazed. He realized Northern was really serious about that time. You mean you found her? Where is she? Thalen asked, looking around. Don't worry, Headmaster. She is somewhere safe. Thalen left a suspicious look on Northern for a few seconds. It had been a short time that he had spent with the white-haired boy, but he kind of knew when Northern didn't want to share something. He exhaled, closing his eyes and opened them. That's fine then. We shall proceed back to Drywall, and from there you can make whatever decision you want to make. Northern nodded. They were all about to start moving, but Northern suddenly stopped and spoke out. One more thing. They all paused and turned to him. I need to know something. His eyes drifted to Alistran, then to Thalen. Who are those hijackers? What hijackers? Thalen inquired with a puzzled expression. Northern turned his face to Alistran. I'm surprised you haven't reported this to the headmaster yet. Alistran washed his palm down on his face with a deep exhale. Please. Not here. Not now. I was waiting until we board a ship, at least. Well, I've been thinking about it. I want to know if it has anything to do with what happened in Arcadia since our arrival. Why was it when we came that a lieutenant of the military suddenly strikes and killed the governor who we happened to be staying at his house at the time? Thalen paid attention to what Northern was saying first. Then he turned to look at Alistran, exhaling again. It's not wrong of you to think like that, but like Al had said, this is not a matter for a place like this. We have a private airship. We can discuss this matter there. Northern examined the headmaster and Alistran, discovering that the headmaster's expression at least held a hint of honesty. He responded, All right, give me a moment to fetch my mother. I will meet you at the airport. Northern immediately vanished before anyone could say anything. Instantaneously, he arrived in the limitless void and was greeted by Jesai, Linus, Night Terror, Black Mamba, Corpse Eater, Revunt and Byran. Byran, most especially, even though he was the oldest and most mature-looking, had his eyes glittering the moment Northern's form appeared in the Void Palace. He could already even sense it milliseconds before and had exclaimed with a bright expression, Master is coming! Master is coming! Northern made a weird expression as he saw all of them waiting all together. He had never seen them like this and wasn't used to this respect, this crowd. Weird. Very weird. He shook his head rigorously for a moment and walked away, leaving all of them. Northern stood in the dark metallic door that separated him from the room his mother was in. He had felt her presence ignite while he was absorbing chaos but was too busy to spare another thought. He was sure that she was awake, but she had not made any attempt to break out of the place or even scream. It made him a bit confused and curious. At the same time, the Aisha he had always known was a calm and calculating woman who would not flare up no matter how disoriented the situation was. No matter the chaos, she would calmly observe and calculate and come to the best answer. Growing up, he had seen times where the answer to solving a particular mystery would be right there, but he and Shin would often miss it because of their impatience. Then she would just come and bring it out for them. Whether it was when they were looking for a thing or when they were arguing about a certain knowledge. She was a very beautiful and intelligent soul. But again, she and Shin had caused him to not be knowledgeable about a lot of things, which made things more than rough for him in the early days. Northern didn't know why such a thought was coming to his mind when he wanted to fill his head with how perfect she was, but he exhaled, steadying his breath and mind. Then he shoved the thought out of his head and opened the door. Aisha was sitting on the bed cross-legged with her baby in her hands. She raised her head as the door opened and a white-haired boy walked into the room. Her eyes widened immediately when they beheld Northern, whose lips after entering curled with a trembling smile. Mother. She stood up with the baby in arms and gently dropped it into the cradle. Then she turned to Northern, slowly moving closer, her eyes shaking, tears marinating her eyeballs. Northern? My son? It's you. Her hands moved slowly and shakily. Yes, Mother. It's me, Northern. His voice was low. He closed his eyes, taking in the genteel and warm touch of Aisha's hands as they made contact with his cheeks. Her lips trembled as they opened. As they shook, so did her voice, her cheeks, and her eyes. Tears streamed down her face. I thought I lost you. Northern placed his hands on her hands, shutting his eyes more tightly. Something was wrong. Why could he not bring himself to shed tears? He was shutting his eyes tightly and drowning in the moment as much as he could, but he felt nothing at all. It felt like there were no tears left to shed. Northern opened his eyes with a pale smile, deciding to let go of the thought and focus on his reunion with Aisha. I'm sorry, it took me this long to come back. Chapter 610. Reunion Part 2. No, we should have done everything in our power to find you. How are you here? Have you found your father? Northern looked around the dark room for a moment before answering her. This place belongs to me, sort of like a pseudo-world of my own. I will explain all of that later. But yes, I have met father, and I'm about to take you to him. Northern's eyes slowly drifted to the baby in the cradle. Aisha followed his gaze, then moved closer to the cradle. She gently lifted the infant, wrapped in woolly white apparel, and brought her to Northern. The child was wide awake, with red eyes and black hair curling on its head. Here's your sister, Silver. The child seemed to chuckle as her name was called. Aisha slowly handed her to Northern, who received her with blank but subtly narrowed eyes. A life was in his hands. A newborn baby, an existence that had just fully come into being, was in his hands. Northern didn't know why, but these were the thoughts that kept coming forth in his mind. He stared into her eyes for a moment, the child's pure scarlet eyes reflecting in the depths of his blue ones. His sister, the one he had given the name to, Silver. That living being was in his hands right now, he was looking at her right now, and yet, there was nothing. It was difficult to explain, but he felt like he was holding any other child unrelated to him. He could feel vividly the void in his heart. Since the last time he'd noticed, it had grown even larger and more hollow. He was looking at his own sister and couldn't feel anything. He wanted his heart to writhe in pain at the fact that he could not feel anything. But it was all the same. At the very least, he had mastered the art of releasing a pleasing and delightful smile. His lips curled to reveal it. Unlike before, the smile seemed to be getting familiar with his face and was less ugly, now more normal. Although Aisha could perceive a certain emptiness through it. She didn't expect her son to be exactly as she had left him, so she didn't even complain. In fact, she was glad he could at least still manage to smile. We have a lot to catch up on, don't we? Northern removed his gaze from the baby and stared for a few seconds before nodding. Then he added, but we need to meet with father first. There are also some questions regarding the guy that tried to kidnap you that I'm curious about, and about your homeland too. Aisha frowned for a bit, then her eyes slowly widened. You know. Northern shrugged nonchalantly. Well, being in the Dark Continent and the few rifts that I have been in has given me certain experiences that have not only revolutionized my entity but also opened my eyes to some truths of this world. Of course, I still remain on a journey of discovery towards it all. Whatever discussion I will have with you will also contribute to that journey. From the few words her son said, it was almost like Aisha could glimpse the extent to which he had changed. And it was far more than she had ever expected or anticipated. She looked down with a somber gaze and later looked at Northern, her countenance broken. I guess it is fine. I can always answer whatever questions you ask, my son. Northern smiled and looked at the child in his hands before giving her back to Aisha. Then he waved his hand. In a flash, the scenery changed and they were back in the familiar underground. The government staff and military personnel there had reduced from before. Even the few that remained were running around, packing up and cleaning the place. Shin's eyes narrowed as he saw a subtle and disappearing shimmer of bluish-black flame appear from nothing and materialize his son and wife faster than a blink could be completed. His eyes widened as he saw Aisha. Her familiar brown hair and golden eyes, her olive skin and gentle gaze, the beautiful features of her face that made her look like an angel in rags. Everything was still the same as when she had suddenly disappeared a few months ago. Only now her belly bump had gone down completely, and there was a child in her arms. Hands trembling and eyes widening so much they could tear apart, Shin staggeredly ran forward. He couldn't hold himself up because his entire body suddenly felt weak and tired. He fell at her feet, his eyes a bleeding waterfall, sadness cracking the visage of his face like fissures through rock. He wanted to speak, but the words were too heavy. Aisha, seeing him like this, also knelt down gently with the baby in her arms. Shin's eyes drifted towards the baby. She's beautiful, our child. She's very beautiful. Those were the first words that came out of his mouth. Yes, she is very beautiful. Our child is. Both couples sobbed as they held each other by the head, their foreheads touching in the moment of heartbreaking reunion. Shin wanted to say more, but he just could not stop the tears. He wanted to stop crying and say something, but it was harder than worn-out hands lifting a sword that could cleave the world in two. He wanted to apologize to her for that argument, for not telling her everything despite how open she was with him. He wanted to apologize for how wayward he had been. The choices of life he chose as a younger child, as a teenager. He wanted to tell her how much he wished he had met her earlier, how much he wished he was never born in that accursed family. He wanted to tell her how wretched his life would be without her, how nothing but hopelessness and damnation would be what he represented as a living being. He wanted to thank her for meeting him, loving him, and marrying him. All those words tingled heavily at the tip of his tongue, and yet nothing could be heard but a groaning wail like the sad tone of thunder that had lost its lightning. Everyone who stood in the scene, even the staff and personnel, had paused for a minute to watch the sorrowful scene unfold. Ryan watched with a bitter taste in his mouth, his eyes lowered and trying to avoid looking at the couple. Thalen and Alistran were also like that, but they watched, their eyes carrying sympathetic sorrow for what was happening before them. Everyone resonated with the scene one way or another. Everyone except Northern. He had taken several steps apart and was watching with no feeling or ache in his chest. Because of this, Northern made sure to keep his mind on whatever was going on. He was so empty that he felt if he should let his mind sway away from what was happening right now, not only would he be just empty, but also incapable of empathy and deprived of morals. And he was scared of what kind of person that Northern would be. Of course, there was little he could do to save what was eventually bound to happen as long as void and chaos continued to live in him. And perhaps soon, the void would eat so deep into his soul that dispositions like this would not matter. He wouldn't even be that thoughtful. Because emptiness had corroded his entire soul. There was a price to his power after all. A price that Northern did not yet know how heavy it would be to bear. After a while, the cohort made it to the harbor, where they boarded the private Citadel ship. Northern stood at the rim of the ship and watched as Arcadia sank into the ground. Luckily for the city, the disaster of the rift had only affected the cathedral. The other devastated place was the governor's house. The shambles it was left in marked the city with a grotesque scar. It was not just about the scenery, but the loss of the governor itself had ushered a melancholy air into the city. One that Northern, as he watched, couldn't quite understand. Unless a governor was so loving, caring, and great, why would the people mourn him? He had always thought things like the death of governors don't usually bother a constitutionally led people. Seeing this made him see things differently and also made him realize how big of a disaster was coming in the future. He looked into the sky as the ship flew away, then narrowed his eyes and gritted his teeth. Lieutenant Dante, you really thought hard and well before deceiving me, didn't you? Lieutenant Dante definitely wasn't thinking about friendship when he asked for that one wish. Northern had thought that he was, although there were suspicion, but he wouldn't deny that he had ultimately believed that they could be friends. Anyways, going to the academy really would be a good choice for now. Chapter 611. Meeting Hao, Part 1. After arriving back in South Drywall, Northern, his parents, and Ryan settled in the Citadel for a couple of days. Those days were strenuous and hectic for Northern, mainly because he had to deal with seeing his mother, father, and sister every day. As simple as it sounded, it was something very complicated for someone like him. With how increasingly void he kept feeling, it was difficult for him to pretend to show certain emotions. And his mother saw through his attempts like glass. There was a doleful look on her face any time their paths crossed, and he had intentionally made sure those times were as few as possible. He had looked forward to meeting his mother. Meeting his parents had been one major drive that pushed him to fight his way back from the Dark Continent. But now that he was seeing her, things were not the same anymore. Everything was not in that place where he had left it. Now, he couldn't help but feel stupid for how he had imagined meeting his parents would be. It was still okay with Shin. Man to man, Shin understood and respected the change. But Aisha was different. Northern hated the look in her eyes. It was like she was begging for her child to come back to her, knowing very well that he had gotten to a point where he could never return, which meant the child she lost a year ago could never return to her. He just felt sorrowful for her. And he couldn't even continue to sulk in his sorry state caused by the weight of his powers. Northern felt like he needed to make up for this void by making sure both of them were safe. There were two things he needed to do to achieve that. First was get to the bottom of both the elf cults and the reason why the Kageyama clan suddenly approached Shin. Aisha's disappearance might have been a coincidence that happened while the Kageyama clan approached Shin. But Northern had another thought. It was inconceivable. What if the elf cult was working with the Kageyama clan? That would make things deeper than he thought they were. So, it was something he needed to get to the bottom of at all costs. The second thing he needed to do was get stronger. That Northern wanted to do by going to the academy. For the next 6 months of his life, he would not be able to rank up his soul due to the penalty, which meant for the next 6 months, he would be busy harvesting fragments, evolving his talents, and copying more talents. Not only that, with the academy's vast knowledge, he would also be learning about talent and soul. First was what was left of his discussion with the lieutenant about force. If there was indeed anything like that, he thought the academy would be the best ground to learn it. The second was about rifts and the history of their origin. He wanted to know what they began with and what exactly rifts in the early days were like. He wanted to know if he could see traces of the Chaos Prince, tyrants, and origins in the books of history. The third was about true names. Northern so far had not seen anything special about true names, but if there was one thing he knew, it was that they weren't there for decoration. True names had to have a purpose they were serving to the soul and its core. But so far, Northern had seen nothing that really painted the value of true names. Of course, in himself, he had gained the ability to steal others' names, therefore ridding them of their abilities, but it was only monsters. Moreover, he hadn't discovered any value that the stolen names held for him. Sometimes it looked like it was just for decoration, but there had to be more. Nameless and formless were the one thing that belonged to him as a careless drifter, without the influence of the system. Northern felt a great sense of attachment to it and the need to unravel its use to him. The fourth thing Northern wanted to learn was the art of craft, not just any craft but blacksmithing. In fact, it was one of the major reasons he was going to the academy. At first, it had just been a guess that since it was the only academy for drifters in the Central Plains, there should be a course there for non-combat drifters. Builders, to be exact. And since reaching South Drywall, he had been asking around, and it turned out that he was right indeed. Northern since then had been planning his departure meticulously. With the art of craft, his knowledge in engineering, and the soul craft ability he gained through Limitless Void, he would be able to cause a part of him that had been buried to bud. And this would give him some utility ability. Hence, he wouldn't just rely on his copy abilities. He would also be able to make up for his lack of items this way. But before he began to do all of that, the one thing Northern needed to do was talk to Hao. He sighed. He had been staring in the mirror for the past few minutes as he cooked these thoughts in his head over and over again, being thorough with them to make sure he wasn't missing anything. He looked away from the mirror for a moment and looked again, this time observing himself. His gaze was unwavering as his calm blue eyes traced his own reflection. The light in the room caught on the faint texture of his ribbed, white sweater, accentuating the clean lines of its design. Since the year was nearing its end, the weather in not just South Drywall but most of the Central Plains was getting unbearably cold, and that was what had warranted the thick sweater. He didn't even get to pick it himself. Left to him, he didn't mind. It was not like cold had an effect on him. The high collar of the sweater hugged his neck, speaking a subtle but bold statement, while the black bands on his sleeves added a sharp contrast, framing his lean, athletic build. His gloved fingers rested lightly on his hip, the black fabric a seamless extension of the monochrome ensemble. The gleam of the silver accents on his pants, a zipper-like detail that suggested both utility and style, caught his attention, and he adjusted the slight tilt of the chain draped along his thigh. Tousled white hair framed his face, its messy and long strands perfectly offsetting the crispness of his outfit. The dual earrings in his left ear added an edge to his otherwise clean look, whispering of rebellion restrained by discipline. His expression was unreadable, save for the faintest hint of thoughtfulness in the furrow of his brows. He leaned closer, the faint shadow of his breath fogging the mirror for just a moment, as if trying to discern something deeper in his reflection. Then Northern muttered to himself, "I guess this is fine for being casual." He leaned away from the mirror and after that headed out of the Citadel. As he walked, several people who were staff of the Citadel bowed their heads upon passing him. At first, Northern had found this strange, but after 2 weeks of seeing it play out no matter how much he tried to stop it, he was getting used to it. The reason was none other than the fact that he was now a sage. In the entire Citadel, there were only 5 sages. Alistrin and the headmaster were among them. Northern becoming a sage made their numbers increase to 6. Those 5 were respected the most in the Citadel. Their presence was very rare because they were always in different regions representing the Citadel, closing rifts and building connections on behalf of the Citadel. Of course, some were probably living their life the way they wanted to. But one of the things that made Therian Citadel one of the powerhouses in the Central Plains and the 3rd strongest citadel was because of the number of sages they had. And now that the number had increased, a great change was coming for the Citadel, and they all were looking forward to it. All this together brought a disposition of respect from them without even being asked. Now, everywhere within the Citadel, people were either referring to him as Sage Northern or Sir Sage. The level of respect was almost choking sometimes. Northern exhaled heavily as he finally came out of the Citadel gate. It felt like he had just removed himself from a heavy tangled cloth. He brought out a small piece of paper in his hands and looked at the location on it. "Well, now, let's see what Howe has managed to accomplish in a month," he muttered as he walked away. Chapter 612. Meeting Howe, Part 2. Northern, after several twists and turns, eventually located the location he was supposed to meet Howe. It was a low-profile bar nestled towards the eastern edge of the city that led to Birkenham Forest, the left wing of the dangerous dark forest that flanked South Drywall's rear and separated them from the main drywall. It was also one of the reasons why South Drywall was able to break away from its mother nation. Northern slipped through the quiet streets, his steps light against the uneven cobblestones. The city around him breathed a strange mix of tension and serenity, the shadows of the Birkenham Forest looming in the distance like an unspoken threat. The bar came into view, its facade modest, almost nondescript. Somehow it looks like a place that looks like Howe, Northern thought as he glanced at the place. It made him remember the tower he and Ellis had gone to meet Howe at, and also the hidden vault of Howe in the forest. Both places had that air of peasantry. He wasn't judging. After spending a few weeks with the Therian Citadel people, it just became apparent. And Northern was realizing perhaps Howe could be one of those guys that turn out to be too humble even though they have the greatest riches. Which is not a bad thing, I guess. The door creaked as Northern pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit interior shrouded in smoke and whispers despite the brightness of the afternoon. The place had no windows. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and cheap liquor, and the patrons, scattered sparsely across the room, paid him little mind. They were the type who didn't ask questions, a perfect veil for those who needed anonymity. Northern's gaze swept the room, his sharp and calm eyes taking in every detail, the crooked shelves behind the bar, the bartender polishing glasses with mechanical disinterest, and the flicker of movement from the farthest corner booth. He adjusted his stance, rolling his shoulders subtly, and moved forward with a purpose that seemed to part the atmosphere around him. He stopped at the table without hesitation. House sat there, a casual slouch disguising the coiled readiness beneath. His long coat pooled around him like a shadow, and his sharp features were partly obscured by the brim of his hat. A pair of narrow eyes met Northern's with a hint of amusement, though the man's fingers never strayed far from the hilt of a dagger resting on the table. "You're late," House said, his voice as smooth as silk but carrying a subtle edge. "Or you are early," Northern replied evenly, slipping into the opposite seat. He leaned back, his arms resting on the edges of the chair, projecting a confidence that mirrored Howe's. Their gazes locked, a silent exchange of power and intent. For a moment, neither spoke, the sounds of muted conversation and clinking glasses filling the space between them. Finally, Howe broke the silence. "It turned out, living in the Central Plains suits you better than Stelia, huh?" Northern pointed to him. "I never thought I'd see you like this. You look more like an assassin than a traitor. It's just a guise. Don't mind all of this." Northern tilted his head. "A guise? Did you get in trouble?" "It's a preventive measure." Northern narrowed his eyes, not understanding what Howe was getting at. Howe sighed and opened his mouth. "I'm trying to create a different persona from the usual Howe the Trader. This persona is who will take your soul cores to trade them. Howe the Trader will be the one managing your flow of income." Northern raised a brow, scrunching one eye. "Is all that really necessary? For what could it be?" Howe almost slammed the table but quickly caught himself, touched it slightly, and leaned forward, whispering, "What do you mean, is it necessary? There is nothing more necessary than this. We are in a nation where humans are not disciplined or held limited by dangers and disasters. Theft is the one greatest enemy to a trader. Even when there was so much disaster, it still struck me, by that damned Ellis and Green boy. I see you haven't still forgotten about that. I can forgive, but I can never forget. I hate theft." He and Northern went silent for a few seconds. "This different persona will help me separate things from each other. This will make it harder for people to trace my work." Northern folded his hands and leaned back on the chair, nodding his head slightly as he thought about what Howe said to him. "I guess it makes sense. But instead of doing that, I can provide a better solution." Howe's eyes staring at Northern intensified. "A better solution?" "Yes. It will be like killing two birds with one stone." Northern highlighted, but in his mind, 3 actually. "Okay then, let me hear it, lad. As you might have known, I am capable of cloning. I will create a clone whom you will teach and use as your own. He will do all the things you need him to do, plus he would also be capable of combat. Hence, you can always count on his protection. More importantly, he would be the link between you accessing the resources and me accessing my profit." Howe was silent for a second. Then he nodded slightly. "I see you've thought this thoroughly, huh? Are you intentionally not mentioning that you want to be watching me through this clone of yours?" "Oh, bingo!" Northern grinned. "But don't get offended. This is business, isn't it? Focus more on the use of this surveillance." Howe exhaled heavily and raised one hand, looking towards the bartender. He dropped the hand, as his face shifted to Northern. "It's fine, boy. It is worth it, and like you said, it is business." Northern's grin dissolved into a gentle smile. He consented with a nod, and a waiter reached their table and bowed slightly. "What will you be having, sirs?" Her tone was almost like the singing of the morning bird. Howe glanced at the menu etched onto the worn wooden plaque the waitress held. His lips twitched into the faintest smirk as his fingers traced along the edge of the table. "Bring me the emberhorn steak, rare, and make sure it's seasoned with ashroot spice. Not the expensive kind." The waitress bowed slightly, her gaze shifting toward Northern. He leaned back, his eyes glinting faintly in the dim light as he studied the menu's offerings. He began, his voice measured, I'll have the brimflame skewers. Extra pyre pepper. Make sure the meat's fresh, not frozen from some vendor in the slums. He was getting a hang of food in this place, and it felt nice. He now even had a favorite meal. Isn't that amazing? The waitress straightened, her movements smooth and practiced. Very well, sirs. Anything to drink. Northern was about to decline when Hao cut in, his tone almost playful. 2 drafts of solstice nectar. It's rare around here, but I'm certain your establishment wouldn't dare serve anything less than authentic. Would it? Her brows flicked up ever so slightly, but she nodded with a composed smile. Of course, it'll be brought shortly. With a final bow, she disappeared into the haze of the bar, leaving Northern and Hao in silence once more. Hao leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Do you know that their waiters here are carefully selected? Sweet voice, beautiful face, and magnifique shape. It looks boring from the outside, but it's a different level of establishment compared to what any would expect. And what am I supposed to do with that information?
Oi.
Don't be boring. You wouldn't say you've never adored a woman before. Northern stared at him, eyes indifferent and cold. After a few seconds of the prolonged stare, Hao's eyes widened, slowly widened even more as his mouth parted and spoke.
Ja. Jave never?
You have really never looked at a woman and adored her. Northern's gaze did not change. Immediately, Hao narrowed his eyes and came closer again. Is it men? I do not have the luxury to nurture or even conceive such finite emotions. Hao sighed and rolled his eyes. Yes, sure. Please, can we move on to why we are having this meeting? Hao cleared his throat and repositioned himself to sit well. He was about to start talking but paused. Less than 2 seconds later, the waitress returned, balancing a tray with practiced ease. The smell hit first, rich, smoky, and layered with hints of charred sweetness and fiery spice. She set the emberhorn steak before Hao, the meat still sizzling on the volcanic stone plate beneath it. The cheap ashroot spice danced along its surface like faint red embers. Northern's dish followed, a row of skewers threaded with thick chunks of brimflame beast. A popular field beast that had come to be as a result of adaptation caused by rift monsters mixing with the natural habitat of animals. Each piece glistened with a crimson glaze. Tiny motes of heat shimmered above the skewers, evidence of the pyre pepper's potency. Finally, 2 golden chalices filled with solstice nectar were placed before them. The drink seemed to pulse faintly, an illusion caused by the bioluminescent glow within the liquid. Northern raised a brow, impressed despite himself. Enjoy, the waitress said softly, bowing before vanishing once more into the bar's shadows. Chapter 613. Meeting Hao, Part 3. It wasn't very difficult grasping the ropes of trade. It was the one thing that I was used to. In fact, things seemed easier in this continent than in Stelia. They have it quite easy. Hao took another bite of his meal, chewing busily with a short pause before his eyes met Northern's, and he continued. But yes, I have been able to secure necessary connections and trade routes. For now, I will be making use of my benefactor's establishment and connections. Eventually, I will break off. Northern glared into his eyes. Do not trust anyone. If you trust anyone, I'll kill you. Boy. Breathe in. Okay. Breathe in. Northern leaned back and sighed. A few moments of silence passed between them before he said, Usually, delicate business like this is destroyed by trust and fickle attachments. Don't go off calling anyone your friend just because they helped you a lot. I will kill you. Really? If you leak the nature of our business to anyone, I will know and I will kill you too. Hao stopped chewing and blinked. But Northern's gaze only intensified, and he added, If you try to be shady with my clone, I will have him kill you. He swallowed. Hesitating for a moment, he said, At what point won't you be killing me? That is to tell you that your life is dependent on this. I have too much to lose. Your life won't even be enough compensation. Hao frowned, his eyes burning with a defiant light. But the look in Northern's eyes was even more powerful and intimidating. There was a spark of authority and power that shimmered in them and made his blood curl. Perhaps what he felt was from his understanding of Northern's strength and how ruthless he was. And now, even more than before, Hao could feel the wide margin of power between the dark continent Northern and the Northern sitting in front of him. The words that Northern spoke to him were undoubtedly something that he would do. This could turn out to be a deal that will destroy and end you or change your entire story and raise you to the richest merchant not just in the Central Plains but the world. All you just need to do is follow my instructions like your life depends on it. He gulped and exhaled. He didn't know yet the extent of what Northern was saying, but for the lad to be talking about being the richest in the world, Hao wanted to believe it wasn't just all bluff. There was substance, even more than what he had seen. Fine. I'm going to bet my all on you, kid. His eyes shone. It was an insane idea, but Hao felt like this was going to become the beginning of greatness. Hao had always had a knack for identifying greatness when he saw one, and since the first day he sighted Northern, he had always felt like the kid was something. But what he was sitting in front of right now was not that kid he had met back in Stelia. Hao could feel something rising in his gut, almost as if he could smell gold. He sighed again and expressed disinterest in the rest of his meal. I understand your insecurities. You will have to trust me to handle things well with no hiccups. I guess you have been deaf since I was talking earlier. Trust is the one thing that I can definitely not, give you. As for the rest of whatever, you have my consent. Hao stared expressionlessly at him for a few seconds. You certainly have become arrogant since the last time I saw you, but all that is none of my concern. Since you promise me great wishes, I will do things the way you want. So, what are we doing first? Northern extended his hand towards Hao. The senile man glared at Northern with a suspicious look on his face. Just hold it. Hao hesitantly placed his hand on Northern's. As he did, he felt his consciousness suddenly dive deep into a thick, clutching darkness, and he suddenly could feel himself standing. Hao almost freaked out. He staggered back. What? What did you do? Where are we? He inquired, looking around. We are in my soul domain. I call this place the Void Palace. Only a few knew of it. Hao's eyes widened as he took in the structure of the place. The magnificent pillars and high ceiling, the ethereal blue light that reflected on his face. The throbbing presence of darkness and heart-lifting flow of blue hue. Showing you this place is absolutely necessary for you to at least have a vision of what I am talking about when I say you could become the richest merchant. Do not mistake this for an act of trust. Yes, definitely. Hao responded with a nod. Master, you are here. I came as I felt your presence. But you are not fully here. Byron's voice resounded as his feet touched the ground. He quickly went to his knees and bowed, greeting Northern. Hao looked at the face of the man bowing to Northern unrestrained and looked at Northern's face. He didn't understand what was going on, but he also knew not to ask. I came here in a hurry, just to show this dude something. Don't you have something to do? Why are you always after me? There's no better thing to do than welcoming my master. Northern exhaled. He did not know how to respond to Byron's excessive loyalty, so he just walked past, saying to Hao, "Follow me." As Hao followed, before moving 2 steps, the scenery changed. It scared Hao a bit, making him freeze for a moment with widened eyes. The palace they were in had transformed to a mountain terrain with crimson soil. A rhythm of metallic clanging continuously soared into the air, disturbing Hao. He looked around, trying to figure out where it was coming from. Then Northern spoke. I have a special and rare ability. Because of this ability, it is possible for me to do some certain things. Is this why you have an enormous amount of soul core to sell? Northern frowned slightly. This is not about the soul core, but you can think of it that way. Then, I can cultivate rift resources in this place. Hao froze, his expression froze, every muscle in his body froze. Then slowly, as beats passed, his eyes managed to blink, like a door creaking open from a decrepit frame. I'm sorry, lad. What exactly do you mean by that? Do you mean that the resources that are gotten from rifts are also available here? Northern looked at Hao with an indifferent expression. Then he nodded. Yes, something like that. Northern paused, looking for how to explain this to Hao without having to spill all his secrets. He stayed silent for a few seconds, a frown slowly forming on his face as his thoughts prolonged. Right now, he couldn't think of any other way to go about it. And lying was really unnecessary. I have nothing to be careful of, really. At least I am getting stronger. Northern had always been skeptical because he knew he was an anomaly. Depending on who hears of what he could do, he didn't want to become a public spectacle and sought by all forms and existence of supreme power that exist in this continent. Not when he had not yet fully known who they were. But right now, there was a need for him to tell Hao so the traitor could understand the scale of what both of them could achieve together. That vision was going to be the reason why Hao would choose never to betray him. He sighed, steeling himself to do what he had never done before. Hao waited patiently. His eyes lit up a little as Northern raised his head. I can absorb rifts. It's a problem with my soul. But because of this problem, my soul is like a gluttonous coffer that sucks up every rift that I manage to defeat. Hao's mouth fell open. His eyes almost popped out. Northern continued, I can absorb the rift resources along with it, monsters that I kill also. So, I use the soul of those monsters to cultivate the resources here. This here is the kingdom of red mines. Northern gestured to the mountains, pointing his hand. Red crystals are cultivated here. I am not entirely sure of all they can do, but one of the things the red crystals have is healing properties. Eating them can heal your wounds. Hao slowly moved his hand, closing his mouth. His voice had gone invisible. I have several other resources too, but what I am trying to say is all these resources we will be sending them out into the world and manufacturing them. Northern looked at Hao as he concluded. Yes, that is pretty much it, I guess. Hao was still the way he was. His hands over his mouth and eyes widened like they would fall off any moment. Northern narrowed his eyes. Do you have anything to say? Hao slowly brought his hands down, feeling the strength leave his body. You said, richest? Hao's voice was hoarse as he spoke. Yes. The traitor suddenly flared up like an erupting volcano, panting. Richest is an understatement. Chapter 6:14, Partnership. Hao staggered backward, clutching his chest as though Northern's words had physically struck him. His breath came in short, shallow bursts, and for a moment, he felt as if the ground beneath his feet had disappeared entirely. He turned his gaze back to the crimson terrain surrounding them, his eyes darting wildly between the towering red crystal mountains. The metallic clanging reverberating through the air now felt deafening, like the heartbeat of some ancient, omnipotent force. No, this isn't real, Hao muttered under his breath, shaking his head furiously. This can't be real. A place that grows and cultivates rift resources? Boy, you're not just talking about trade routes anymore. This is something else entirely. This is revolutionary. His hand trembled as his voice also did. Being the richest is an understatement. With this, we would be revolutionizing the market of the Central Plains. We will be owning it. All we need to do is find a trustworthy alchemist. This won't be about selling anymore. This will be about reshaping the economy, turning the Central Plains into our market. Northern looked at the old man, lingered for a second or two, before saying, Follow me. Hao slowly raised his head and watched Northern walk forward. He got up in haste and followed. A few steps later, they were already at the close base of the Red Mountain Mine. The incessant clangor of several irons had gotten more audible and was ear-splitting. But some sort of comfort lay in the fact that Hao's eyes could now see the source of the sound. His eyes widened and shook at what he saw. Monsters. So many of them. And they were all wielding axes and mining the hill of red crystals beneath them. Trembling subtly, Hao walked forward a few steps, slowly bent down, and picked up one of the red crystals. He brought it up close to his face and carefully inspected it. This is different. I have never seen anything like this before. Northern crossed his arms, his piercing gaze fixed on the traitor. These resources are only the beginning. This place isn't limited to the red mines. There are other domains, other regions within this space that cultivate entirely different resources. Resources that the world hasn't even imagined yet. Hao's head snapped up, his expression a mixture of desperation and greed. How many? Northern smirked. Enough to create an empire, and more than enough to destroy one. Hao's hands trembled as he set the red crystal down and stood up shakily. His lips parted, but no words came out. He inhaled sharply, pressing his palm against his face as he tried to process everything. My whole life, my entire career, I thought I knew the heights of wealth and power, Hao muttered. His gaze met Northern's, a strange gleam of mania in his eyes. But this isn't just wealth. This is divinity. One would not just be a traitor. This could plunge you into the realm of monarchs. Northern's expression darkened. Careful, Hao. I don't have any plans to become a king or anything like that. A king? No. No. That's not what I am talking about. Northern frowned in confusion. What else means a monarch that is not a monarch? In the world of merchants, there are 7 powers that are recognized not just within the Central Plains, but across all continents. These powers are recognized not because of powers as a drifter, but because of the power of their resources. They are called the monarchs. Northern's frown deepened, his gaze narrowing as he regarded the trembling trader. Monarchs, you say? 7 powers that govern trade across the continents. Tell me more. Hao straightened his posture, a flicker of composure returning to his features as he realized the depth of what he was explaining. The monarchs aren't kings in the traditional sense. They're something far more influential. They control the flow of resources, the lifeblood of nations. Gold, rare metals, soul essence ores, ancient relics, and even food supplies. Monarchs decide who thrives and who falls. His voice gained momentum, his earlier doubt and fear fading into excitement. These monarchs don't answer to any kingdom or clans. In fact, some kings and clan leaders are actually monarchs. The popularly known monarch of Wood is the King of Sussex. Monarchs are not bound by borders. They shape economies, forge alliances, and spark wars, all with a signature or the withholding of a single shipment. Northern remained silent, his expression unreadable. He remembered very well that Sussex was very prominent with their strange and living wood. A resource like that was bound to be revolutionary and tremendously affect the impact of living and civilization. Northern narrowed his eyes and gestured for Hao to continue. Hao gestured toward the red crystals. With what you've discovered here, this could place you not as a mere competitor but as a contender for the 8th monarch. Do you understand what that means? You wouldn't just have influence over the Central Plains. You would disrupt the balance of the entire world economy. Northern's eyes flickered, his tone calm yet tinged with cold amusement. And what makes you think I have any interest in joining this game of monarchs? Wealth, influence, power, it's always a trap. One false move, and it all crumbles. Hao took a cautious step forward, his voice dropping to an almost reverent whisper. It's not just about wealth or power, boy. It's about freedom. A monarch doesn't bow to anyone. Not to any clan leader or king. Not even to the rifts that plague this world. I'm talking about enough authority and power to own your own territories, purchase rifts even, because you have the power of resources. Resources that the world has never seen. With this, you could carve your own destiny. Isn't this what you have always wanted? Northern's gaze darkened, his piercing eyes locking onto Hao's. Freedom has always come at a cost, old man. The question is whether it's worth the price. Hao faltered under Northern's unyielding stare but quickly recovered, determination blazing in his expression. With what you've shown me, the price would be nothing compared to the reward. Northern turned away from Hao and stared at the mountain, his mind churning with thoughts he didn't care to share. He had not expected things to take a turn like this. He had never even heard about such an existence. It seemed like something only intercontinental traders like Hao would know. He even knew the identity of one of them, so Northern believed Hao knew what he was saying. But that did not mean everything from that point would mean ease all the way. Moreover, it's a system that already existed. Just diving into it was a messy and careless thing to do. Not especially when he has so much to hide already. The clanging of metal on stone echoed louder, the sound carrying the weight of untapped potential and dangerous ambition. "I'm not interested in playing their game," Northern said finally, his voice cold and resolute. "But that doesn't mean I won't create my own." Hao blinked, taken aback. "Your own? Instead of me doing all that, why don't you become the monarch instead?" Northern touched Hao's shoulder with a smile. The old trader's eyes trembled. What? He had never thought he would hear such a thing in his entire life. A low-born trader like him, who had worked his ass off to become sufficient and well-known to an extent, becoming a monarch? Hao had first discovered the monarchs during his younger years as a trader. They owned and monopolized trade routes. Each one of them collected taxes from merchants that used their trade routes. So, one way or another, a prominent trader was bound to know of their existence, while mundane humans did not. He had never once in his entire life dreamt of becoming a monarch. It was something inconceivable. It was like how a lowly commoner should never dream of becoming a king. To Hao, the monarchs were untouchable titans, beings whose influence and power extended far beyond the grasp of ordinary mortals. His lips quivered, and his voice came out as a rasping whisper. You're joking, right? A monarch? Me? I can't." Northern's gaze was unwavering, his tone resolute. "You can. And you will." Hao shook his head violently, stepping back. "Boy, you don't understand what you're saying. The monarchs, they don't just rise. They're born into their power or seize it through impossible means. To even challenge their dominion is to court death. That is not a realm someone like me belongs to. I can't do it. Don't be a coward. I'm sure no one deserves this more than you do. I can't trust you, of course, but if there is anyone rather deserving of an opportunity to sit atop this throne of importance that you speak of, with my resources, it should be you. After all, you are the one spearheading this deal. We will do it with a clear vision of you becoming a monarch." Hao's mind raced as he tried to grasp the enormity of Northern's words. "Even if I were to try, what then? The other monarchs won't just sit idle. They'll see me as a threat. I'll be crushed before I even begin. Everything might be stolen from us. If it was to be, you can protect yourself with the power you have. But I am just an old man, Northern." Northern smirked faintly. "That's why you have me. You think I'd let something like that happen?"
No, Hao.
"I'll be the power backing you. While you take the fame and everything, I'll be needing the rights and privileges to make life easier for myself." Northern's smirk widened. "So what do you say to this even greater magnitude of partnership?" Chapter 6:15, Elliot Reborn. Northern had not been expecting such a differential upgrade to his goals. What he had only planned for was riches. With the influx of resources that he had in the rift, he would be able to create an endless flow of wealth for himself. While being in the academy to better his knowledge and grow expeditiously, Hao would be gathering riches for him continuously. Eventually, when he comes out into the world, he wanted to have purchased a standard mansion for himself. One with an enormous compound, several land gardens, and stables too. I wonder if they have horses. I've never really seen a horse before. Most of the contemporary animals that Northern knew from his previous life, he had never seen. Or worse, they were strangely mutated by the adaptation and coexistence of rift monsters from shatterings that somehow were able to escape death. Northern wanted to have a home to return to. Well, he did have a home with a father and a mother. But he wanted a house. A literal house. One with several rooms that only he would live in. His lips slowly curled into a satisfied smile as the thoughts brandished his face. Then he averted his eyes for a minute and rested them on the clone before him. He was about to use the clone ability again. He would put his memory into the clone and make it become a sentient, independent existence. This time, it won't be as complicated as when he created Byran. He just wanted to create someone who would be intelligent enough to learn from Hao and also be of tremendous help to himself in the future. Hence, Northern chose a certain kind of memory to fill the clone with. The buried memories of Earth before his death. It was like bringing himself back, but in a dispensable shell. although Northern hoped the clone would live long enough to be of actual help. He thought of using Byran, but it was too much of a hassle. Any of the summons were bound to cause a problem. Generally, there would be problems in this endeavor. Northern needed an assistant that would reduce the problems, not add to them. Byran did not seem like a suitable choice. After he was done, the clone looked the same, recognized him, and spoke the same way he did. They even had the same face and hair, and he was equipped with the Twilight Dawn. It's time I let this armor go. It does hold a lot of memories. It reminded Northern of his days as a war general. The way he fought like a maddened monster on the battlefield, fighting for his life and mind at the same time, without even realizing it. The damned castle master, Call. Remembering all of it again made Northern curse internally and hope that weed of a being was finally dead. After he was done with the clone, he returned to the surface world to meet Hao. His head rose from the table as his consciousness resurfaced. Hao's eyes were still glittering. How did it go? Are the preparations complete? Yes. Northern looked towards the bartender and asked Hao, "Have you settled the bills?" "Of course. I did that a few seconds ago." "Okay then." He stood up. Hao watched Northern stand with a slightly dazed expression on his face. "What are you doing?" "Confused." Northern responded, "Standing? What about these? What about it?" Hao raised his voice a tad higher. "You are telling me you will abandon this expansive plateau of delicacies? Just like that? Do you think money for food is that easy to come by?" Northern's brows furrowed. "I've had something little to eat for breakfast already. I didn't expect them to bring so much. Don't bother me." He shrugged off and walked away from the table. Hao, by the way, signaled to the waitress that served them. She approached him, her smile as vibrant as ever. "Please, can I get something to package all these?" "Humph, humph." Hao spoke and cleared his throat. "Of course, sir. Definitely." She bowed her head and left, then came back a few minutes later with thick white nylons. She helped Hao carefully pack all the leftovers. The old man glanced away, clearing his throat intermittently as she packed it for him. "Here, sir. Thank you for your visit." "Haha. Thank you too. The customer service of this place is top-notch. One has to make sure resources do not waste." "Hee hee." The lady smiled and bowed her head slightly, then she walked away. Immediately, Hao headed for the door and came out of the building. Upon coming out, Hao received a scare that made him almost stumble back. "What? Is that your clone?" The two Northerns smiled sweetly. Then Northern said to the clone, who could be distinguished by the armor he was wearing, "Introduce yourself." The clone bowed slightly, scratching the back of his head with a shy chuckle. "My name is Elliot. My master told me to serve you very well." Hao examined the clone with an obstinate expression on his wrinkled face. He put his hands behind his back and cleared his throat. "Humph, humph. He told you that, didn't he?" "Yes, he did." "That was rhetoric." Northern input. "Oh." The clone, with an innocent expression, exchanged glances between Hao and Northern. Then he brought his face back to Northern and chuckled awkwardly. "I'm very sorry, Master Hao. I am sometimes slow-witted. With time, I'll make sure you like me." Hao felt his judgment of the clone freeze in his throat. With the clone not being able to recognize a rhetoric, he had almost wanted to complain to Northern that it would be of no use. But the clone at the same time was able to instantly discern his dissatisfaction with it. That is not something a doll would be able to do. It allowed Hao to think, perhaps it was not because of its inadequacy that it was unintelligent enough to recognize a rhetoric but its nature of person. For some reason, there was a timidness and naivety that attached itself to the clone like a plague. He cleared his throat again. Humph, I'm sure you'll learn. With my tutelage, you will become the best. I've done it again and I can do it again. Consider yourself lucky, Elliot." Elliot raised his head, sparks lighting in his eyes as he heard Hao call his name. Then he bowed again and chorused, "Yes, sir." Northern looked at the two of them. He was satisfied with what he was seeing. Of course, the nature of person he was, he felt would be a hindrance in shaping the clone's personality. But he had used his former self's intelligence, hard work mentality, his nerdy mind that made him very willing to stay up multiple nights and study, that made him extra interested in his field of study. He would go out of his way to find things out and equip himself with knowledge and technical know-how even when it wasn't in the school syllabus at the time. People in the university, of course, hated him because of this. But it was one of the many things that undoubtedly made him the best engineer in his time. If only he had been a little wiser, or at least had enough social experience early enough to see that love was no longer worth caring about. Perhaps he was just an unlucky piece of crap. But all that did not matter anymore. A very funny thing was, the knowledge of the experience might have closed his heart, but it wasn't even a core factor in shaping the person of his character today. With all those dreadful experiences in his past life, the Dark Continent made way and showed him double of what a cruel life could offer. And the two don't compare. Such was life. If one was to think he had experienced the most cruel life one could possibly live, another, even more cruel and vicious one can pop up and decide to deal with them. Whether it is with sufferings or enjoyment, it is best to just be humble with it all. Imagine going around boasting that you have seen the worst of life there can be, only for you to get trapped in a dark continent with no way out. Northern scoffed at his own thoughts and shook his head. Hal left the clone and brought his eyes to Northern. "You good?" Northern released a smile. "Never better." He paused for a brief beat and asked, "So, where to from here?" Hal glanced at the clone. He had abandoned the nylon with the clone. Elliot was humbly standing behind the short trader. He finally responded to Northern's question. There are a lot of places for me to visit. But I want to go to the banks and do necessary registrations and licensing to prevent complications in both the near and far future. After which I will commence fully." Hal glanced at Elliot again. "Are you sure he is all I need to access the goods? I have briefed him on all that he needs to do. Don't worry and just pass the command." Hal grinned in satisfaction. "So what about you? What are you going to do?" Northern shrugged. "Go to some damn school and teach." Chapter 616, Reconnection. Northern sat down on an exquisite wooden chair and watched as Aisha tenderly folded his clothes into a brown polished box. Her face was somber, and she had uttered not a single word. He had meant to do it on his own, but she came into his room and took it from him. Without any word uttered between the two of them, she had been doing it carefully and gently, internally working hard to keep a straight and determined face without breaking into tears. Sometimes she would sniff, but the strong hold on her face did not break even in those times. And seeing it happen like this, Northern had no idea what to do or how to react to it. This caused him to be even more broken. She finally finished, closed the box, and tapped it with a subtle smack of her lips. "It's all done. You are all set." Her silvery voice ran out coldly for the first time since she came. Usually, the enforced fineness in her voice should break him, but it didn't. It was almost getting too hard to understand how she felt, what she wanted from him. He had no idea what to do in this moment and, for once, wished someone would yell at him. Aisha finally brought her head up, although slowly. Her quivering golden eyes carefully tore into his. It looked like she was just managing to look at him wholesomely for the first time since they had returned. She returned her head back down sorrowfully and held her hands together in front, scratching her nails. The silence was haunting, so when her voice made it back again, it was like daylight breaking through eons of lightless nights. "I am sorry." Her voice shook. Northern could finally feel something, even though subtle. The shaking of her voice carried a hint of pain that pinched the inside of his chest. His heart, if he had any. He moved his hands and touched her shoulders gently. "You shouldn't be sorry for anything, Mother. You are not Ruffsburg. What happened to me is by no means you or Father's fault. I don't want anyone to blame themselves for how I have turned out. First of all, I don't even hate how I have turned out. This is the best version of me, and there's nothing more I could have wished for." His voice went silent as he took a moment to exhale before going on. "Sure, those experiences were gruesome and could have destroyed the mind of anyone. But do you know that one thing that has kept me going till now was seeing your face, reuniting with my family, and Silver. You guys were my motivation and my reason. When everything looked like it was all going to the end, you guys were what gave me the strength of will to pull through. So, I don't think it's right to carry guilt in your heart for anything." Hearing the words, Aisha's stronghold could not hold on anymore. It broke, gushing rivers of tears breaking through the already cracked walls. Her tears rolled down with trembling shoulders. Northern held her and brought her into his warmth as she cried profusely. His words were like a sword of liberation, breaking off the shackles of guilt and pain that she had been wearing since the day he disappeared. She continued to cry and at some point sob, and although it was tiring and awkward, Northern stayed there and patted her back, which was even more awkward for him. He felt like he could do better than pat her back. Maybe say something? But what would he say? He had said all that needed to be said already. Please stop crying? The suggestion made Northern pity himself even more. How would he tell her to stop crying? Getting further distracted by his thoughts, Northern decided to shut it all out and just suffer in the moment. And after a while, she finally piped down. Northern helped her sit down and stood away from her. Now, it was very awkward deciding to step out. Should he sit down too? But he had things he wanted to do. He still had to speak to Thalen and Ryan. But was it okay to just walk away? Northern sighed. Simultaneously, his mother's cracked voice reached his ears. "There is something I need to tell you. We actually, but on behalf of Shin, I'll just say it." Northern narrowed his eyes. He, could already guess what she wanted to say. But he said nothing and instead sat down on the chair next to her, fixing his ethereal blue eyes on her. Aisha took a few seconds. Her breath was gentle but could be heard clearly in the quiet, warm room. Rays of the daylight star filtered through the curtains and allowed the predominant colors in the room, red and gold, to dance around and glitter luxuriously. Lael. Northern felt goosebumps as she called his name. There was a sense of uniqueness he felt whenever she called him Lael. It was something only she could do, almost like he could feel the attachment of value and importance to the name. "You are not our legitimate child." She paused, hesitated, but eventually raised her head to look at Northern's face. When she saw that there was no change in his expression, her eyes slowly widened. "What? You knew already?" Northern chuckled lightly and pointed to his white hair. "Here." He also pointed to his blue eyes. "Here too. I think everyone already figured that one out too. Besides, when you look at Silver, isn't it pretty obvious that father's gene is quite strong? She's half-elf, obviously, but still had black hair and red eyes. Damn Kageyama bloodline." Her eyes froze for a few seconds. Then, oh right. Will you look at me?" She chuckled, wearing it as a facade on her embarrassment. "Well, there's more to the story than just you being adopted." Northern cocked his head slightly. "There's more to the story?" Chapter 617, Ripple Effects. Northern cocked his head slightly. "There's more to the story?" "Yes, there is." Northern sat upright, straightening his back and watching patiently, giving Aisha time to talk without revealing any anticipating emotion. His features were deadpan. "There's a certain event surrounding your birth that we found out later and buried." Northern's brows furrowed a bit. "This is it. It's a bit foggy because I could not see all that was happening, but it has to do with that strange being that killed everyone." Northern was positive about it. Aisha continued, "You are a royalty, a prince of Riamgard. I know it's difficult to believe." Aisha happened to look at Northern as she spoke, with a doleful expression drying up her face. But her expression froze there and started to shatter. She blinked, with the next words frozen on her tongue. After a few beats, she asked, her voice shaking, "You knew? Damn me. I'd fail at acting." Northern thought that he would do his best and act surprised. He had widened his eyes with no words and thought he did it well. How did she see through that? Northern scratched the back of his head and chuckled. "Well, I kind of met my birth mother in the Dark Continent, the Empire of Luingard." Aisha felt strength leave her body. "What?" She didn't even know how or that she had screamed. A frown creased on her beautiful, thick brows immediately. And you didn't think to tell me that? Northern bowed his head in shame. I'm sorry. I missed the timing. I was thinking of the best time to do so. Aisha's tone rang out with so much tension and authority that Northern's response came out without being conceived in his thoughts. It was almost instinctive. The voice of her tone demanded it, and he just naturally gave in to the demand. That had been how Aisha was in the family. He and Shin, none of them could dare say otherwise when she was pissed. Even now, nothing about that part had changed. Somehow it made Northern glad. Some things still remain the same after all. Aisha sighed, exhaling away the anger. I guess it's fine. I understand it would have been very difficult to tell us about it. You are only 16 after all. She folded her arms and closed her eyes for a few seconds before finally exhaling. And it all dissipated even on her facial expression. All right. So how was she? Northern shrugged his head. She's fine. She's beautiful. White hair and blue eyes like mine. She told me that I am the Emperor of Riemgard's bastard, and people are trying to kill me. Aisha's expression folded darkly. She's right. There were dead people we found in the forest, and there was a trace of something, a dark entity very dangerous. From the traces it left behind on the wound of the corpses, not even Shin and I would have stood a chance. And you might not know it, but I am a sage. Northern smiled. I didn't before, but I do now. I can see it. Then Northern suddenly squinted his eyes as he realized something. Wait, why did it sound like you were boasting just now? Aisha shrugged and looked away stylishly. I wonder why. Mother, it's wrong to brag. Huh? Coming from you when you walk around literally announcing that you are strong with all that coldness emanating from you.
I am an elf, a royal elf.
Besides the fact that I have an explicit healing ability because of the nature of my attribute, I have a talent ability that is able to manipulate flames. It's nothing like those fire-kind abilities you surfacers have. As you know, as one closer to the truth of soul force, the power we wield is undiluted. Northern grinned. Yeah, sure. But I am strong enough to make your kind lay beneath me with just my gravity finger. And trust me, I'm not even using 0.5% of my power when I use a gravity finger. Aisha watched him with a pleasant look on her face. Then she said, I am proud of you. To be able to become a sage in 2 years of awakening. It's impossible, it has never been done. I'm sure. You'll become more in the future. Her tone now dove low. Which is why we also can't afford to just stay the same. Northern looked at her with a worried expression. What do you mean? He asked. She raised her head as she spoke. Shin and I are going to go on a journey. He might have not told you, but he is someone that deserves to die 100 times. But he is the man I have fallen in love with and the father of my 2 kids. I have a cruel responsibility to suffer his fate. The least we can do is correct his past mistakes, if possible. Northern frowned. To what end? The past is the past. I think that journey is pointless. He disagreed. It's not pointless. Your father has to pay for his sins one way or the other, which is why we will find everyone he has given a cruel fate and try to make things better one way or the other. Northern shook his head, his displeasure and disappointment evident in his bleak expression. It's useless. This is just inviting more trouble to come dine with you. Aisha shrugged. Still, it's something we must do, whether to make ourselves feel better or to make them feel better. It must be done. And through it, I'm sure your father and I will find purpose anew. Northern understood that there was nothing he could do to stop them. After all, he was not going to ask everyone to return to the countryside and live the life they've all been living before. Things had changed, and many things could not go the same way. The event of the Dark Continent had caused a massive ripple effect in everyone's life. Now, the future was all dependent on that ripple effect. Northern sighed and opened his mouth, almost hesitating. But he spoke. All right then. If that is what you two would like to do, then I will accept it. Protect yourselves and be fine. But there's one last thing I'd like you to do for me. Aisha smiled. I know. You want to know about my origin, don't you? Northern looked at her and nodded his head. That's right. There's little I know. I was brought to the surface when I was only 7. I've lived over 100 years since then. 100. Don't freak out in your head. Living over 100 for an elf like me is nothing out of the ordinary, and I am not old by any means. We are just a species that have really long lifespans. Almost immortal, but we are not immortal. I remember little from my home world, but sometimes I feel like it is just like this place, the terrains, the atmosphere, although the edifices are different, but the air and land and trees feel just the same, like a carbon copy of each other. I see. I'm sorry. I'm not of help to you. It's fine. You were of plenty help, Northern said with a smile. Aisha then brought out a woolly cloth, extending it and placing it on Northern's hand. This is the apparel that you were wrapped with as a child. She gave him a crimson metallic badge. It had the insignia of what looked like a lion head to Northern on it. I suppose this is what proves your identity as a prince of Riamgard. Northern looked at the badge and clenched it tightly in his hands. Then he looked at her with a warm look in his eyes. Thank you, Mother. Chapter 618. The Boy. Are you really sure about this? A black-haired boy sat in front of Thalen's table. On the table was an oval mirror, small but large enough to capture one's entire face. The boy glared into the mirror, pulling one strand after another and checking himself out. His black hair cascaded in silken waves with a subtle yet mesmerizing detail. The tips and roots glowed faintly with a bluish hue, like the edges of a midnight flame. This ethereal tint caught the light, harmonizing perfectly with his piercing blue eyes, which seemed to hold the depth of an endless ocean. Against the pale backdrop of his skin, the interplay of dark and blue created a striking contrast, as if shadows and light danced in quiet rebellion, radiating an aura that was as haunting as it was captivating. Crap! Was I always this stunning? The boy's hoarse voice echoed in the massive library like cold smoke drifting through the upper air of a colossal hall. In front of the boy was seated the headmaster of Therian Citadel. His black, lustrous hair evenly groomed back, slick and neat. Piercing violet eyes glued to the paper in his hands, not sparing a glance of attention to the boy sitting in front of his table, feeling himself completely. Thalen exhaled. He tugged at the edges of both brows with his thumb and index fingers, rubbing them in a circular motion, then moved his hand to rub the corners of his eyes. After which, he sighed and dropped the papers on the table and gave the boy in front of him the first look in a while. Are you really sure about this? Thalen asked, gesturing at the paper in his hands. The boy seated before him curled up a lip. Why? Is there something wrong? I just can't understand you. If you'll be going to the academy, you should be going as a student. After all, you are 16. It takes a lot of balls to say you want to be an instructor in the academy. It takes a lot of balls to be a sage at 16. The boy grinned maniacally. His grin made Thalen's head suddenly heavy. He had been going through this serious pain in his head all because of the tasks that this boy had been asking him. Well, the academy will not give you the position of an instructor. The boy's brows curved into a gloomy scowl. What? Yes, like I said, it is difficult. However, they are willing to give you an interim instructor position. With your rank as a sage, you've earned the right. But they demand that you drop by for an interview. An interview? What the hell is it with that strictness? Well, they are the only one of their kind that exists, so of course they are strict with their rules. Besides, becoming an interim instructor, you'd still get paid and be able to do the things you want to do as an instructor. Interim just signifies that your position is temporary until you've proven yourself worthy of a permanent place in the academy. The boy leaned back into his chair and gently tapped his hands on the armrest, creating a progressing rhythm that made Thalen frown lightly. Will you stop that? So let's say I was to fly to the academy and get rejected. I'll have to come back? Northern leaned forward. I'll burn the whole place down before coming back. His tone dripped with viciousness. Despite the cold and oppressing air that the boy exuded, Thalen's demeanor was unchanged, unaffected. He stared indifferently into the boy's blue eyes and said evenly, I doubt the academy would let someone like you go. They will, one way or another, make sure you enter. Because I'm a sage at 16? You are the only one of your kind to ever exist. The boy looked down for a moment, a small frown tugging at the edges of his brows. I don't understand why everyone is making a fuss about this. I aim to be a paragon by 18, I wonder how they will be. And by 20, I hope I can reach the pinnacle. So, the rest of my life would be with ease. The boy sighed with relief and shifted his gaze back to Thalen. Well, that is fair. Thanks for your help. And what about the other thing? Thalen, from the papers strewn across the table, picked out a white envelope and tore it open. He brought out a silver card that was in it and read the name on it out loud. Lael Artemis Rian. What's the inspiration behind this new name? Northern arched a brow in cold hostility. Since when did you start to care about other people's business? Since that other people was capable of crossing over 2 ranks in 6 days. So your first name is Lael, middle name, Artemis, and last name, Rian. That's quite a unique combination. It makes you feel like a foreigner. How so? Northern inquired with a sharp focus pinning in on Thalen. Most names in the Central Plains have an origin and ties to history. The letters are not haphazardly used. Only a foreigner will bear a name starting with R. If a citizen of the Central Plains were to, they could be killed for it because it belongs to the Empire. Northern grimaced. That makes no sense. Rian is R and he is definitely from the Central Plains. Thalen was silent for a few seconds, his lips tightly shut. His sudden silence made Northern suspicious. Northern narrowed his eyes. Spill it. What do you know? Thalen sighed helplessly. He still lingered for a few beats of the heart before speaking. Rian, I looked into his family. They are foreigners. Northern's gaze became sharp. Foreigners? Yes, they moved to the Central Plains about 100 years ago. They are the renowned chalice of the Cold Flame. Northern squinted his entire face. What is that? It's their legacy. His family has a deep-rooted legacy found in their talent. The legacy was founded by the first patriarch of his family and was named Chalice of the Cold Flame. Ever since his era, every other patriarch has upheld this legacy. Until a certain branch couldn't. Because of it, they were banished from the family and migrated to the Central Plains about 100 years ago. I'm not quite understanding. What legacy is the Chalice of Cold Flame supposed to be? I'm not quite sure too. This is the closest anyone has been to finding out about them. Only they hold the secret to crossing the ocean, and the Empire is in constant communication with them. Many people think they are one of the major reasons why the Empire has been able to amass enormous riches across the continents. Northern's eyes went out of focus for a while. He was silent, his lips slightly opened. Ah, now that I think about it, he made a weird statement while we were in the rift. What was it again? Northern lingered for a bit before the words surfaced in his mind. I am not a son of ice. I am a son of cold flame. Northern's lips curled into a cunning smile as his cold voice crawled out. It seems there is more to this boy than meets the eye. Chapter 619. Next chapter. Northern thought more about Rian, and about the fact that they seemed to share the same name. However, the pronunciation was very different. Northern's name, his mother had pronounced as Rian. Rian's name was pronounced Rion. If the Empire let them freely use the name despite having claimed an exclusive right on the use of a certain letter, then it must mean the Johnson family was a big deal. Which left Northern with a bugging question. Why did he refuse to go back home? Northern spent a few minutes on that thought alone, his mind running through all possible vindications for his refusal to go back home. He was strong, had gotten stronger than 5% of people in the Dark Continent. If he returned home, he would be the heart and joy of his family, and he was still refusing. Or did he not know this? Is he the kind that is unaware of how strong he has become? Northern squinted his eyes for a minute and shook his head. Nah, he definitely knows. Rian's actions and words sometimes had been too daring for someone who has no idea what strength he possessed. He even threatened to kill Northern when they arrived at the governor's estate in Arcadia just because of Northern's oppressing bloodlust. Northern left his thoughts for another time as he finally reached in front of the said person's door. He knocked twice and waited. After a few seconds, he was about to knock again when the door slowly drifted open. Ryan showed his face from the narrow opening, his eyes droopy and dark. Northern's eyes widened unbelievably. What? You are sleeping? Yes. What do you want? Drowsily, Ryan asked. I will be leaving for the academy soon. I wanted to talk to you. Ryan stayed a few minutes, deep in thought. Then he looked at Northern, his head slightly tilted. I don't think there's anything for us to talk about, though. I want to open to you. Open the goddamn door. Dickhead. Goodbye. Ryan slammed the door and turned away, immediately falling back on his plush master bed. Northern stood there, dazed at the fact that that crappy son of cold flame actually slammed the door on him. He sighed and curved a corner of his lips whimsically. Then he slowly dissolved into his shadows and manifested from the corner of Ryan's bed that he had caught a glance of. Immediately his presence fully formed. Ryan jumped up from the bed, an ice cone instantly weaving into the air. He saw Northern, frowned, and shot the ice cone at him. But Northern caught it with bare hands and shattered it into ice speckles. Ryan scowled. What are you doing? How did you get in here? He had asked the question before realizing it was a useless question, so he followed it up with, Get out. Northern folded his hands and beamed. Make me. Ryan jumped onto him, but he instantly dissolved into the shadow of Ryan's bed and came out of the shadow of the chair that was opposite the bed. Ryan instantly swung his head with a deep red scowl on his face. Northern extended a hand. Wait, I didn't come here to fight you. Then leave. After you tell me why exactly you are refusing to go home despite being this strong. What exactly are you scared of? That is none of your business. Go to your goddamn school and let me sleep. Will you look at this dickhead? When did you get so good at using those kinds of words? You should watch your company. Northern grinned. Anyways, what is your plan? If you won't tell me your family problems, at least let me know as your elder brother what your plan is. Ryan's nose wrinkled in disgust. Oh, I. What is that annoying look on your face for? I heard you're only 16. I am 18. I should be the elder brother here. Northern's face became dark. You dare. Ryan flashed a nasty smile, unbefitting of what had been known of his demeanor so far. The thought of hitting Northern right where it stings pleased him more than he thought it would. Northern gritted his teeth and scratched his black tresses. Never mind. It's my fault for caring deeply about a brat like you. Just make sure you don't get yourself killed before I come back. He turned away and headed to the door. He was about to open the door but stopped as Ryan's voice came out. Before you come back, I will be stronger than you are. Northern grinned and turned his head back. I look forward to the rivalry, but right now you are not worth my attention. Come talk to me when you become a paragon for a start. Dickhead. Ryan spat with a grimace. Like I said, you should really watch your company. Northern opened the door and went out. Come back and close the damn door, you dickhead. Northern shook his head with a smile as the echo of Ryan's yell reached his ears. Damn. He sure is a fast learner. Northern from there went to meet his father, with whom he discussed a lot of things, including a residual of which he had discussed with his mother. She had informed him about what they talked about, so there was little Shin had to do or say. Hence the goodbye was short, with Northern leaving his father a single note of advice this time. Protect Mother and Silver, even if it costs your life. If they die or anything happens to them, I will be the one to personally kill you. The look on Northern's face and the vicious cold bloodlust that made spit dry in Shin's throat did not make him think his son was saying something he wouldn't be able to do. As far as being stern went, he could see it all in Northern's eyes in that moment. Everyone stepped out and escorted Northern to South Drywall's warp gate. From South Drywall, he would warp to Variolania, which was the kingdom he was initially from. Variolania Airport will take him directly to the academy, after which he will confront the next chapter of his fate. Chapter 620. The Crimson Shadow. Northern stood on the cabin of the airship, his hands behind his back and eyes fixated on the flowing clouds. It was not a coincidence that he was on the same ship he had boarded 2 years ago to the academy. He could recognize the same crew from that time. Some parts of the ship seemed to have been changed. The metallic bow in front was slowly losing its luster. A few other changes had been made. The wood on the right side had been changed, which insinuated that the ship probably got in a crash that gave it a costly injury. Northern did not care about all of that. He decided to ride this ship to deliberately remind himself of the pain that he had to go through in the Dark Continent. A pain that all began with this ship landing in the Academy. He didn't even get to spend the first night. He didn't get to take a tour around and see how things were in the Academy. Damn Ruffsburg. By the time you come out of your solitary training, I will be right there waiting for you. A maniacal grin darkly adorned Northern's face. He held the rim of the cabin and leaned on it, the grin only widening as the ship went. He was filled with so many evil thoughts for Ruffsburg that a dark atmosphere loomed around him. Anyone that almost approached where he was standing felt a chill and shivered. For some reason, that area was colder than the rest. It felt like there was something of primal evil there and made them quickly retreat. After a couple of hours of traveling through the air, Northern watched as the walls rose from beyond the clouds. His mental image of it had gotten very blurry. The Academy walls. Now that he was looking at it again, he could see how enormous the Academy's walls truly were. It was blasphemy to compare it to that of Lewengard. The force of flood that Raven had used to destroy Lewengard walls would definitely not have worked with the Academy's walls. They could already see its high walls before even approaching the sanctuary of the Crimson Shadow, the island on which the Academy was nestled. Northern, with laser focus, observed as the ship slowly approached the crimson shadows that filled the depth instead of vast waters. Now that things were different, he was sure he would be able to figure out what they were. Slowly the ship glided through the sky. Northern was at the ready, his chaos eyes dividing into two on each side. All four blue eyeballs stayed closely with each other to peer into the essence of this wonder. What could it be? Northern anxiously thought as the ship got closer and finally flew directly on the red cloud. Northern stared down, carefully observing the crimson shadows from a perception that superseded common reality. The air grew dense, stifling, as if the world itself recoiled from the presence of the crimson clouds below. Emerging from the suffocating shadows was a grotesque tapestry of crimson eyes, countless and unblinking, suspended in a chaotic mass of writhing blackness. Northern immediately frowned at what he saw. Each eye shimmered with a malevolent glow, their scarlet irises pulsing like dying stars, exuding an eldritch hunger that gnawed at the soul. They watched with an intensity that defied understanding, 1,000 predatory gazes piercing through reality, endearing to seep into the cracks of his mind. The only boon to it was that Northern did not find it difficult resisting their attempts. It was now that he tasted the great benefit of the mental fortitude that Chaos Flame gave him. The air quivered with their silent scrutiny, heavy with a primordial dread that clawed at reason. The pupils, abyssal pits ringed in fiery hues, seemed to devour the surrounding darkness, drawing it inward like a vortex of despair. Around them, the world distorted into grotesque silhouettes. The surrounding air and cloud seemed to malform into clawed appendages that reached toward the blood-red luminance. Even the few earth that were scattered around and the distant wall of the Academy appeared scorched, smoldering in hues of molten orange, reflecting the searing wrath of the infernal eyes. Shadows writhed unnaturally, as if sentient, fleeing from the overwhelming light yet tethered to its baleful presence. There was no rhythm to their blinking. Some opened wide, exposing the infinite depth of their malice, while others narrowed, cruel and calculating. They whispered a silence more chilling than sound, a language of terror that promised ruin to all who dared linger in their gaze. Northern felt his pores rise. His entire body froze in place. What he was looking at, he had never in his life seen, and he couldn't even find an explanation for it. It was not the eyes themselves that struck fear into his heart, but what lay behind them. Northern's danger sense was piqued as eyes of intent had merged with chaos eyes, and he could sense something beyond that depth. Something that was being sealed by the crimson shadow, something vast, ancient, and unspeakable, pressing against the thin veil of reality. A force of hunger that had forced open eyes through the shadows that should be blocking it from seeing reality and was now watching through those countless eyes and waiting. A couple of the crimson irises shifted over, directly gazing at him. Immediately, Northern staggered back, falling on the cabin of the ship, heavily panting and wishing whatever that thing was didn't see him. "Boy, are you okay?" one of the crews asked. But Northern sat there on the ground and said nothing. He just stared into the ground. "What is that? Is that what they call one of the 9 wonders of the world? More like one of the 9 calamities." Even its gaze alone seemed more powerful than the entirety of the Belial that I fought. His thoughts subsided for a few heavy breaths. Then he closed his eyes in irritation and slowly got up. "To think I was starting to get pompous that I am strong. I don't see myself defeating that thing with all the power I have right now. Even if I was to team with all my summons and Dante and the Emperor of Luengard, I don't think it's still possible." With a tight frown, Northern headed into the ship. "Damn, I need to sleep,"